listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition of the most disruptive show covering news, events, politics, and more from across the disunited states of America and the increasingly fragmented surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning emperor in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, good morning, everybody. I will tell you, it is weird here in Washington, D.C. We are back in the studio now. And it's cool to see you, Jamarl.
But it's strange.
It is just a completely different recording, broadcasting environment. This is
first time together.
It is.
In studio.
Exactly. We've been doing this for almost a year now, and that is just the state of things with the pandemic. But we've been doing things for almost a year now, completely remote. And now we are back in the studio, and it's good to see. It's just very trippy. I'm in a different space. I'm not used to this. Anyway, we have headlines this morning that I think we should get to, but that is top of the hour. We are reunited in Washington, D.C. All right. First up, though, in COVID news this morning, more than 22,300 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, with just under 250 new deaths. Over the past week, there has been an average of 41,057 cases per day. That is a decrease of 30% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 34% of the American public has been fully vaccinated so far, and 46% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected more than 32,736,000 people across the United States and killed about 581,300 people. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is under increasing pressure to impose a national lockdown as the country today experienced 366,000 new cases, one of the worst days this weekend. The country's health minister reported 3,754 virus-related deaths today after 2 days of about 4,000 deaths per day. In national political news, one of America's largest pipelines, which carries fuel from Texas up to New York, was hit by a ransomware cyber attack on Friday, shutting down its over 5,000 miles of pipeline. Administration officials said they believed the responsible party was a criminal organization, not a state, although according to one of CNN's anonymous sources, the criminal organization is one based in Russia, known as DarkSide, which sounds spooky. The Biden administration said it is working with the pipeline to prepare for future attacks. Also, House Republicans are set to vote this week on whether or not to replace Liz Cheney as House Republican Conference Chair. We'll be coming back to this conversation in a moment, but this is one of the main animating debates in terms of policy and ideological differences, personality differences, too, in the Republican Party, with the supremacy of Trump waning. Anyway, in international political news, Israeli police fired stun grenades and rubber bullets at Palestinians in one of the most sensitive corners in Jerusalem, near Al-Aqsa Mosque. These events relate to Jerusalem Day, but they also have other causes that we will be getting into later this hour with our guest, Laith Marouf. There were 2 bombings in Afghanistan. Al-Shabaab, the criminal group, has come out and said that it is behind a bomb attack in Mogadishu that took place. A BBC investigation in the Philippines found that more than 40,000 people in the country are reported to have been employed to run British companies, hiring temporary workers in the UK as part of a tax avoidance scheme. In France, a right-wing newspaper has published a second letter warning that the country is heading toward a civil war. That letter was signed anonymously. In tech news, briefly, Elon Musk headlined Saturday Night Live this weekend. The first host of SNL to open up about having Asperger's syndrome, and the first to talk about it within the first minute of their opening statements that fine Saturday Night Live night. Anyway, last headline here, gene editing. The first recipients of a new CRISPR technique that involves editing genes while still inside the body say they are doing well. The patients are genetically blind. And again, this is the first version of that CRISPR technique to actually edit their genes inside their bodies instead of taking them out of the bodies, editing them there. and then reinserting the genes effectively. Anyway, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines, and we'll be back talking about this on the other side of the sound effect. See, I am also out of the habit of calling for our sound effects, and so that came on a little bit awkwardly. Anyway,
sound effect.
A lot of headlines this morning, Jamarl. We have Liz Cheney, which we talked about. I talked about for just a couple seconds.
Yeah.
We were talking about this before we went on the air this morning. Actually, what was your take?
Well, they're trying to eat her alive, right? And the interesting thing is why. That's the interesting part. Because if you think about it from an ideological standpoint, is Liz Cheney that radically different than any of the other Republicans? I mean, has she voted dramatically different than Trump? No. Her issue is one thing. Trump lost the election. That's her thing. And everybody else is like, shut up about that. Shut up about that. Will you shut up about that? It's like, we have a clip of Lindsey Graham. We're going to play it later if they want to cue it up. But everybody is basically telling her, shut up. She won't shut up. And she's like, no, it is a big deal that they had a putsch attempt against the Capitol. And look, just because I agree with Liz Cheney on this very particular point doesn't necessarily mean she is not Darth Vader's daughter and carry many of the genes that her dad had with her. So it's like, just because we agree on this one specific point doesn't mean she's great. She voted with Trump on an overwhelming majority of the stuff. It's just on that one issue of reality. They tried to overturn the Capitol. And why aren't you guys bothered by that? And that's a big deal. Like, it's hard. Like, it is hard to get that across. People are taking that, I think, real cavalier just because it looked so ridiculous when it was happening. Like, it was in slow motion, right? Trump was like, hey, help me turn over the government. And people were like, he's doing that in broad daylight. Hey, help me turn over the government. Why aren't you helping me turn over the government? I need you to find me votes. I need you to find. And it's like, that looks so ridiculous. But just because it looked ridiculous doesn't necessarily mean that it wasn't trying to actually overturn. Like, what if Mike Pence went along with that? What would happen? Think about that for a moment. Because at that point, you're talking about levers of government that are in conflict with one another. The vice president has just done something that he shouldn't be able to do, but he's doing nonetheless. What happens? Now, do other Republicans come and say, yes, we agree with this? And then what happens if members of various states said, you know what, we agree with Trump on this? Like, you get basically a lie perpetuated as the truth by, 30% of the population, including people who are in a political space. That is damaging to a country. And for the political party, like a major political party, to basically say, Trump won this. Or, we don't want to talk about the fact that there was a putsch attempt. Despite all of these guys basically at the time screaming bloody murder. Oh my God, they're trying to kill us. Like, all of them were freaked out, right? And McCarthy, for example, screaming on the phone at Donald Trump, like, who the F do you think you are, or I am? Basically saying your supporters are trying to knock down the wall. And then the very next day, Donald Trump is in place in his party. Liz Cheney needs to shut up. Like, that's astonishing political gravity. Like, I thought Trump was waning in power. No, I don't think so.
I thought that he was dead. I thought that right after all those events were happening, I thought he was like 6 feet under as a political figure. I was off the ball on that one, so maybe you should take this with a grain of sand.
I was like, I thought Trump was going to be. It seemed like he was the dominant force, and I thought, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it seems like he's waning. Maybe I haven't. No, I don't think that anymore.
I don't think so either at this point. No.
Yeah.
No,
it seems like he's a thing.
That seemed to have been cemented at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, a few months back, which we covered on the show, and he seemed to do pretty well there. He was headlining in straw polls after CPAC. He was
Golden Idol.
There was the Golden Idol that got dragged out, and wheeled around the halls of the Conservative Political Action Conference, the Golden Idol of Donald Trump. No, but he had that strange, he has political longevity. I don't know what else there is to say about it. And this represents one of the next natural debates on the other side of an event like January 6th, which is how to relate to a political figure like Donald Trump in the Republican Party.
Right.
Because he's huge. He's magnificent. Apparently, he's able to last through 2 impeachments more than any other president.
And a putsch attempt.
And on the other side of this, he's still going. I don't know what else to say. Although I will find many other things to say.
Think of Mitch McConnell. Yeah. Think of what Mitch McConnell did. Mitch McConnell gets out there, gives that speech. And he's like, Trump is guilty as sin. Trump caused it. It was his rhetoric, etc. However, he's out of office. And so there's no point of an impeachment. Meaning, for the posterity, you say that. But when it comes down real, like brass tacks, I'm not going there.
And despite that, well, you brought also, of course, going back to Mike Pence here, it's not that he wasn't in on it. It's that whether he was going to back up Trump was one of the main bones of contention, obviously, between him and Donald Trump, as they were trying to get votes recounted, as they were trying to contest the election effectively.
Well, Pence wasn't in it. That's just it. Like, if you read the stuff behind the scenes, one of the biggest bones of contention was that Pence wasn't in it.
He didn't go through with it. But also on the day of, I remember Trump sending out angry tweets when he still had a Twitter account.
Yeah.
Going after Mike Pence for not letting, not approving his reelection. And we were describing this as a sort of low-grade degradation of American democracy, not a coup, quote-unquote, not with a capital C by any means, but we were talking about it in those terms, and then this happened, completely disrupted American democracy on a foundational level. It doesn't seem like we can't recover from it, but it's almost like you have a visible fracture in a bone or something like that. You have a line of brittleness and weakness that you sort of see clearly articulated.
Yes.
Even though it doesn't seem to be affecting the motions of the beast or whatever, whose body it's supposed to support. Anyways.
Not to drop a line.
No. Oh, yes. Fault lines. That is
no pun intended.
Anywho.
But yeah, it does look like a break of sorts. I mean, I don't think people realize how dangerous this is. You have one of the political parties, major, meaning this is not like this kind of fringe group on the side and you have 5 different parties and 2 of them. No, this is one of the main political parties basically not acknowledging January 6th. That's astonishing. I mean, like, think about what they were doing and what they wanted to take place on January 6th. And for one of the political parties to say, yeah, we're just going to pretend like that didn't happen. And for Trump to run again. He said if Republicans take this House, he's running again. Look, he thinks he can win. And if there's not mail-in ballots, maybe he could. And the wild part is you have one of the political parties that has the power. Like right now, you have all of these southern states that are changing the voting laws. Well, whatever people want to think, it will make it difficult for some to vote as opposed to the others. You have another political party that is in power, House, Senate, presidency, has the power to change it and won't do it. And yet the other political party has no compunction at all in changing the laws in their states to make sure they can have a better chance of winning. How weird is that? Like, it's almost like one side is perfectly willing to use power in their self-interest. The other side is not. Look, I don't get that. Like, to me, this is a political thing. Like, this is like one of those things of, all right, we have the House, we have the Senate, we have the presidency. Okay, what are we going to do to make it better and easier for us to get elected? Now, Republicans would heartbeat, no issue with that. Democrats, they get weird with that. And I don't know if it's the federalization of elections. I don't know if it's that. I don't know if it's they just feel weird about it. But if you're looking at like the gerrymandering that took place, if you're looking at interstate cross-check, if you're looking at voting laws where you can use a gun law, a gun ID, but you can't necessarily use a student ID, that stuff that was taking place, well, they have no issue with it. And look, Democrats have a finite amount of time before one of their Democrats die. I mean, many of these guys are old. What happens if one dies? And then at that point, they have 49. And then you no longer have the majority. Like, whether they're paying attention to that. If they remember correctly, going back during, what was it, Elizabeth Warren, Scott Brown, I think, took over in Massachusetts. A Republican taking the House in Massachusetts. That gives them, taking the Senate, that gives them, 59 votes as opposed to the 60, which means they no longer had the majority under Obama. It can happen. It can happen. So if they're going to use power, they better use it now.
It's true.
Yeah. Oh, 7:14. All right. Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment with the soapbox. To touch anything.
Fault Lines. Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM at 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. You can also join us in this conversation in the chat, a tweet, and of course, by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. For those that are wondering why my channel is not up, it will be up tomorrow, so don't scream too much about that. This morning, I was conflicted about what I wanted to talk about. I rode the train for the first time in like a year, and Elizabeth Warren had popped up. And look, anytime Chief Running Snake has the opportunity to pop up, she's a trigger spot for me. And because she's a trigger spot for me, I always look for the opportunity to take a shot at Warren. That said, when I got to my desk, I saw a Babes for Bernie button, and my choice was chosen. It was cosmic. There was no shame. There was no doubt, just infinite clarity. Bernie Sanders is ready to kick some tail, and I'm right there with him. Let's play the clip.
I wonder what you think about this trend. It's not just in America, it's actually in other Western countries where centre-left and left parties, it's the education divide. They're becoming more reliant on college-educated voters, and they're losing non-college educated voters.
And it's urban and rural as well.
Urban, rural as well, for sure. Why do you think that's happening?
Well, I think if I am a working class person in this country, I've seen my job go to China. I'm working for $9 an hour when I used to make $20 an hour. I don't have health care, or I can't afford it, or I can't afford prescription drugs. You're resentful. Are we talking to those people? I think we're beginning to see that in the last few months under Biden. But Democrats traditionally have been very tepid, very fearful about going big. And I will say,
I think there's a glossiness to it as well, sort of San Francisco, New York glossiness to the party.
I'm so smart.
You know?
I am really smart, and, we go to $100 dinners, and who really cares about those working class people?
Let's stop right there.
I think it is fair to say.
Who really cares about those working people? I'm so smart. They call that smugness or out of touchness. That's what that's called. Steve Rossetti, aide to Biden, he says we have a little more time for consideration of this aid and the percolation of these proposals to have broader consultation and dialogue. There's more receptivity to the Republican side than having dialogue, and they also see the potential to reach some common ground here. Now, what they're talking about is the infrastructure package. And look, Sanders, in his interview on Axios, this was on HBO, he basically made the point of, like, bipartisanship is not the point. And I have said this before, completely agree with him. Bipartisanship is not the point. Not only is bipartisanship not the point, it can be a loser if you are being bipartisan for the sake of bipartisan. I am not leaving out of this room until you and I make a deal. Fine, give me your car, your house, and your wife. What? Yes, that's the only thing I'm going to take for the deal. Are you going to make that deal, or are you going to stay with that notion that you're only going to leave with the deal? Bipartisanship is not the point. The point is whether or not you can get something done for the American public. That's why you were elected. And considering the number of people that have died, the number of people that were ill, the number of people that were ruined from the standpoint of their jobs, the number of people that were already in dire straits before all of this took place, I think the American public will let you do what you want to do. Sanders made the point. Here's how Sanders, in general, I don't agree with that. The bottom line is the American people want results. And frankly, when people, $1,400 check or $5,600 check for their family, they didn't say, oh, I can't cash this check because it wasn't done with Republican votes. No, they didn't say that. They didn't care about that. What they care about is that they could feed their families, that they didn't have to go to the food bank, that they could actually give their kid or give their wife or provide basically. Even if it was in the short term for them to get to something from point A to point B, it was a provision. It was the ability to do it. And no, they didn't care one iota that the Republican Party didn't help. In fact, there's something to be said about a competition where you beat your opponent to the point where your opponent relents, where going in the way that your opponent goes is only leading to obliviation, is only leading to extinction. Now, the catch here is, how far can Democrats go? And if Bernie Sanders, if you listen to him, Sanders wants to go big, and he's somewhat annoyed by this penchant for Democrats to not be willing to do that. The catch here is that Bernie Sanders is trying to save Democrats from themselves. Think for the moment, if Biden loses the House, or if he loses the Senate, what happens to the rest of Biden's agenda? When we are speaking right now, Biden has the capacity to push the Senate, to push for the things that he wants, to get rid of the filibuster. But the catch is he's not going to do any of those things, which is kind of the problem. And I suspect, which is part of the reason why Sanders is sitting here right now having this conversation saying, I want to go big, and the Democrats don't want to go big, and they're annoying me because they don't want to go big. My name is Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders has a point. You've had nearly more than 500,000 Americans to go up in flames over the course of a year. How many businesses have gone up in flames? How many people are in these jobs now that they had no idea that they would have to take just to keep their family and their lives intact? And is this really the situation where you want to lowball it? Are you really believing that the American public is not okay with you pushing for an infrastructure plan? Not only are they okay with you pushing for an infrastructure plan, they are okay with you grinding every Republican down, including some of the Democrats down that are standing in your way to get that plan through. That's where I believe the American public is. Think about your opposition for the moment. What are they talking about? Are they talking about the infrastructure plan? Are they really talking about the stimulus plan? No, they were talking about children's books. They were talking about, oh, cancel culture is so bad, they're just canceling. Oh, the immigrants, the immigrants. They were looking for anything that they could talk about other than the issue that was being put on the table. Democrats were basically negotiating with themselves. How do you negotiate against an infrastructure plan, even if that infrastructure plan is not entirely infrastructure? It's human infrastructure, quote unquote. How do you fight against that? How do you push back against that? How do you say, no, the American public is not worth X or Y? Now, you've already thrown the American public under the bus saying the American worker is not worth $15 an hour. And I'm saying you said that exponentially. But what about infrastructure? How far are you willing to go to get your ideas accomplished? And the catch here is the American public will back you. Do you have what it takes to do it? I don't believe Biden does. And I strongly suspect that's why Sanders is sitting here right now having this conversation. The catch is, if you want to ensure that you preserve your majorities, if you want to ensure that you keep the House and the Senate and the White House, you need to show the American public that you care, that you give a damn. That's what you need to show. And that's the point that Sanders is trying to make here. That's not about bipartisanship for the sake of bipartisanship. That's something else. That's above it all. And in going in that particular position, you have the opportunity to basically to break your opponents. The fact that they are not standing there toe to toe with you on this particular issue gets across that they can't. And yet, you're still continuously negotiating yourself down. There's no reason to do that. It's perfectly straightforward. Go big. Kick some butt. That's where I'm at. I'm with Sanders on this. Bipartisanship is not the point. And I get that Shane is probably going to say, well, what about this fight that takes place that these guys are going to existentially kill each other off and it's never going to end and one side is going to escalate? I disagree. I think you do get to the point where one side relents because they can't necessarily continue the logic in the way that they've been going. If Democratic Party, for the most part, stays the course that they've always stayed, then yes, you're right. The people get disenchanted with the political space and you have this kind of race to the bottom. What happens when there is a tick to the left and the public actually believes like, whoa, this guy seems to be something different. And the Republican Party can't have that fight. Do they relent? when Mitt Romney is like, okay, $10 an hour or $11 an hour, is that a relent? And could you have ever really conceived of a Republican ever agreeing to a minimum wage increase before? I suppose you could if it looks like they can't compete under the current rule set. What say you, Shane? I think Sanders is right.
Sanders certainly sounded good there. He sounded more honest and more in touch with people than he had when, for instance, he was in the primaries. I don't know, man. He sounded more like an actual populist. If you not just an economic populist, but specifically trying to understand the plight of the working class and railing against overly tidy intellectualism and just broadly against these sort of ivory classes of whether you talk about the intelligentsia, the economic class, whatever. He sounded like that kind of person. He sounded a little bit like Donald Trump in the way that he was railing against this stuff. But the problem, of course, with Sanders is that he went along with it. When he got railroaded by the DNC, he didn't push back nearly vociferously enough, which meant that in some sense he was just supporting the party that he had just lost to, and that seemed to be pretty directly the opposite of what he actually wanted to get through. That was what the DNC was going for. Anyway, the problem with the whole conversation is that Jamarl, you're right in describing Democrats who can't get anything done and this weird sense of bipartisanship, even though the Republicans are offering meager actual criticism of the infrastructure bills and all this stuff we're talking about. I would say that the Republicans on this side of January 6th feel very weak because they just had an attempted insurrection in the name of a Republican president. And if
they're still backing that guy.
But if you're going to take that seriously, then they lost that. And so think about that. One of the parties is in a state of low-grade civil conflict. They're having their own serious divisions right now over whether or not, for instance, Liz Cheney is going to be the representative anti-Trump cohort, or whether they're just going to clean house and have a thoroughly Trump backing Congress. That's the schism they're stuck in right now. And so going up against the Democrats, who don't have that much better, who have, again, a nearly senile president and some big dollars on their plans and some cool stuff in there, admittedly, but not really all that much, nothing like FDR.
Yeah.
On this side of a crisis, a major political and economic crisis like COVID obviously was, medical crisis first and foremost, but clearly a lot of economic hardship in terms of businesses getting shut down, a lot of civil conflict right now. The stakes are pretty high. Things are relatively serious. And what you have is weak party leadership on both sides. We're sort of more or less consolidated around Trump on the Republican side, but Trump is literally deplatformed right now. I'm just sort of giving a state of affairs. Yeah. For some reason, being back in D.C., it's you get a summary sense of what's actually happening out there in the world. I feel maybe a little bit more, and you're kept back from it. I'll put it like this, though, Jamarl. I know this is more personal. The last time I was in D.C. a year ago, the streets were completely empty.
Yeah.
From the coronavirus.
Yeah.
And now they're 100% full back up. Trying to move into my apartment the other day, it wasn't working at all. Anyway, I took our monologue. Your monologue off rails. We're talking about this stuff, but
no, you're fine. You're fine. I think your point is, like, both of these political parties are weak, and for the Democratic Party to not be able to go big with a weakened Republican Party who can't make an argument to stand up to it, what does it mean about Democratic Party? Yeah, no, that's a good point. And Sanders did go along with it. I mean, I'm wearing my Babes for Bernie.
You are
fondly thinking about the populace. But yeah, he went along with it. And look, there's a question of this notion of, at what point do you need to give in order to balance out? I don't think Sanders needed to give in personally, at least not when he did. And it looked like his heart wasn't in it. And honestly, it even looked like he was a part of it. So let's do this. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a minute, going to Colombia. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not-so-distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history. This week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. So Colombia has seen a huge amount of protests based on a tax reform bill where the public has basically revolted. You've also seen many of the protesters, at least 26 dead over the course of the last several days. And the question becomes, what is taking place on the ground in Colombia? We're joined with one Wyatt Reed. Now, Wyatt Reed is a Sputnik News analyst and producer for By Any Means Necessary, which airs on Radio Sputnik Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard. Wyatt, thank you for joining us, man. How is it going?
Good. Thanks, Jamarl. Thanks, Shane.
Absolutely. So I am reading 26 dead over the course of a few days. It seems President Duque is killing right many people. What is going on the ground in Colombia?
Well, right now we are entering the 13th day of the national strike, originally against the tributary tax reform that has since grown. This strike, these protest actions have since grown to encompass a wider range of issues: economic injustice, police terror, the failure of the government to respect the peace process that was negotiated with the FARC. So far, we have seen dozens of protesters killed by police. I'm hearing from some sources that the number is actually significantly higher than that number you referenced that's being reported in a lot of Western outlets. The Temblores NGO put out the figure of 47 people dead so far. They say they were able to determine that at least 39 were murdered by police. They also, in a report issued last night, condemned other abuses by police that demonstrators have been pretty widespread. They say they're frequently intentionally perpetrated to generate this kind of climate of terror, and that includes 278 victims of physical violence, 963 arbitrary detentions of protesters, 356 violent attacks on peaceful protests, and at least 12 victims of sexual violence, many of whom were minors. So the situation has really come to a head. In much of the country, the protests were slightly diminished over the course of the weekend. I think today we are likely to see a serious resurgence across the country. In Cali, they're calling for a sort of million-man march. And the authorities, the governor of the Cauca Valley province, where Cali is located, has placed the entire region under a near total lockdown. She said the only exceptions would be for trucks carrying food, medicine, or gas. That went into place at midnight last night and will apparently last until Saturday. So that's kind of where we find ourselves currently, the situation on the ground here in Colombia.
Now, what about the meetings with the political opposition? Did they have any kind of bearing on the way the protesters were thinking? Apparently, Duque said, "We had a productive meeting with the Coalition of Hope, great opportunity for dialogue, overcoming differences, and without political point scoring." I mean, is that true? I mean, the opposition has basically said they have a lot of work to do. And for that matter, who is this opposition that he is engaging with?
That's a good question. The Coalición por la Esperanza, it's been a fairly divisive group, not necessarily terribly well known by certain sectors of the left. A lot of people have been accusing them of kind of selling out the cause for a number. It does break down to the specific group, specific factions. But by and large, it does seem that the majority of the unions that were behind the original push against this so-called tax reform, as well as just the sort of spontaneous individual protesters on the streets. My sense, and I will say, this is my first day, and I haven't been able to get out to the protests yet, so a lot of this I'm basing on sources, and I'm basing on social media. of the accounts, included. But my sense is that the Coalición por la Esperanza does not speak for nearly as many of the political factions that they would claim to. And I think we'll find out later today just exactly how widespread their reach is.
And for people, Wyatt, thank you for joining us. For people who are familiar with different types of protests, some more disorganized or decentralized, and some quite a bit more centralized with specific demands, and even various parties coming into coalition to support it. Where does this fall on the spectrum? What are the different parties pushing for? What are the different groups pushing for? Which of the sort of demands that you see being voiced through the protests are coming from what areas, and how much popular support do they have? And frankly, and then I'll hand it back to you, Wyatt, what is the mood right now in terms of whether this is going to pan out, whether this is going to work out, and whether the protests will manage to accomplish some of the specific items that you're probably going to bring up there? Wyatt, what's the feeling right now?
Right. Well, as I said, it's our first day here. We haven't been to the protest specifically, so to say exactly, who is saying what and feeling which way, a little bit premature for me to say. It would be a little bit more speculative at this point. I will say, by and large, the goals have extended to basically demanding that essentially, what our government would refer to as kind of a regime change, a complete overhaul of the system. So folks are saying they want to end the police impunity, this culture of violence, of sexual abuse that seems to permeate throughout the ranks of Colombian police. They are also, of course, calling for the complete repeal of the tax reform. The government of Ivan Duque has said that they have withdrawn this proposal, but there are a lot of fears that they're essentially configuring or reconfiguring the exact same policies and attempting to push those forward in more in less direct ways. But really, I will say the only way to know what's been happening thus far from an outside perspective has been to use social media, because frankly the media in Colombia is simply not doing its job. And I say that not to disparage them, but just as a matter of fact, when you look at the coverage that has been provided by the big networks like RCN, Caracol, they have simply been going on air and lying to their viewers.
What have they been saying? What specific lies are you seeing there?
Well, the most notorious example was from RCN earlier this week when they described the beginning of the massive protests in Cali as a celebration for the change on behalf of the tax bill. It was portrayed as though all these people were out in the streets screaming and celebrating the fact that this new massively unpopular tax reform bill had been passed. Just a complete lie.
Well, that seems almost comical.
Yeah.
That seems so horribly wrong that I can't help it. Was this a situation where there was like a protest and a counter protest going on, and so you had some support, marginal support that they could make the article about, or where did that claim come from, if you know, Wyatt?
Honestly, I couldn't tell you exactly where it came from, but that was a question that many Colombians were putting to them as well, because it went viral. It was such a massive lie that it was simply, it was comical to the point of absurdity, but also, I mean, it's not funny, right? Because people are dying. Last night, a similar thing from Caracol, which is another notorious right-wing media outlet. To be honest, all of the leading media outlets in Colombia are heavily right-wing, heavily affiliated with the government. A chyron from a scene last night describing the situation in Cali yesterday, where indigenous protesters were met with gun violence by paramilitary forces. This was described on Caracol as citizens and indigenous face off. So, I mean, there's a level of racism there, the implication that indigenous people are not citizens, the implication that these paramilitary forces are, and this is all coming in the wake of the country's top general, Eduardo Enrique Zapatero, coming to Cali last week and announcing to dozens and dozens of police officers and soldiers. He said, "I spoke with the chiefs of Caracol and of RCN, and I'm going to bring a journalist here, and I've already given her a plane. So you could see last week there was already this understanding on the part of the Colombian regime that they were essentially losing the media battle, the public relations battle, despite having essentially a monopoly on media in Colombia.
Well, that's a good point. What is the public thinking of this? And not just the public thinking of this. From the standpoint, do you think that how has the United States engaged this, if at all? Because I haven't necessarily seen this in the media here, like talking about. And will there be a political consequence? Meaning, how's the public regarding what's taking place?
Well, from my interactions so far, it seems to be fairly widely embraced, this national strike. Members of sectors that you wouldn't traditionally expect to be in favor of something like a national strike, of these ongoing protests, knowing as people do that in many cases these blockades, these shutdowns do lead to food shortages, do lead to medical shortages at some times. And the people are essentially saying, by and large, I would say that these sacrifices are worth it for the time being in order to affect some meaningful reform. So we have seen a statement from the State Department essentially kind of both siding this, condemning police overreach, but at the same time condemning violence and vandalism and urging that to stop. So, I think that's we've seen also statements from the UN, High Commission on Human Rights, that was a little bit more forceful in terms of denouncing the police violence. Last night, we also saw a call from another UN rapporteur to end the media blackouts, to end the censorship in Cali and the Cauca Valley specifically. Throughout the past week, there have been numerous credible and confirmed by international observers blackouts of internet, essentially attempting, a fairly crude attempt by the Colombian regime to simply silence those protesting.
And Wyatt, again, thank you for being with us. We're almost out of time here. One quick comment, and I know we're likely to have you on again pretty soon to talk about this. So I'm sort of setting myself up for something here, but I'm also even publicly talking about tips of the trade, that kind of thing. What are you planning on talking to people about later? Both in terms of when we talk to you next, what can we ask you about that you'll sort of be going out there trying to discover? But I'm just curious, your general approach to these things. What are you looking to do when you're out covering these protests, talking to people? What are you trying to learn? What kinds of questions do you typically are you thinking of asking later on? I'm just curious, again, because we'll be following up. Wyatt.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great question, Shane, and one worth digging into. For me, the most interesting question is always kind of the simplest one, is why are you here? Why did you feel it so important to come out here to put your body on the line, especially in situations like what we have here in Colombia, where the chance of violence and of even death is simply so high. So that question, I think, is really the main one. The next question is, where are things going from here? And obviously, you can kind of dig a little bit deeper in, depending on who you're speaking to, right? If you're speaking to somebody of some influence within some organization, that person will be able to tell you at the very least that they're thinking of that specific organization. I think this is really the challenge of those of us who call ourselves journalists, is to essentially try to compile all of these different disparate perspectives and morph them into something coherent that those without the access or the time can digest a little bit more easily and know what's happening in the world.
Wyatt, thank you for that. We're out of time. I want to appreciate you joining us for this conversation. Hopefully we can get you back on soon once you've gone out, talked with some more people, gotten a sense of where they're coming from in Colombia. Wyatt, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
And for those listening, that was Wyatt Reed, Sputnik News analyst and producer for By Any Means Necessary. That's a show airing here on Radio Sputnik every Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. When we come back from this break, we will be talking with Laith Maroof, award-winning multimedia producer and broadcasting consultant, talking about what's going on in Palestine with Palestinians, hundreds injured, dozens killed. recently. We'll be back with Laith on the other side of this short break. Be right back.
Fault lines.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No, it's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we are talking with Laith Marouf, award-winning multimedia producer and broadcasting law consultant. We're talking about what's going on in Israel, the dispute, Israeli-occupied Palestine, I think is how our guest would phrase it, as he has in the past when we've been on the show. This dispute between Palestinians and Israelis, as Israelis look to push Palestinians off of Israeli settlement sites. There have been massive protests on this recently, including one this weekend near the Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of the holiest sites in Jerusalem. Hundreds injured. A big situation here, Laith. We wanted to turn to a conversation with you to try to get a handle on this. Laith Marouf, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us. Let's talk about this. What is going on here? Again, hundreds injured near the Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of the holiest sites in Jerusalem. What is the situation there? Why is this now happening?
So, in the last few weeks, the apartheid Israel authorities have been attempting to remove Palestinians from the Sheikh al-Jarrah neighborhood, which is an Arab neighborhood that is adjacent to the Aqsa Mosque, and replace them with colonists. So obviously the residents of Sheikh Jarrah have been refusing to leave their homes. Some of their homes were already taken by force of the settlers and the apartheid authorities that came in protecting them last week. And since then, Palestinians from all across Jerusalem have been coming to Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood to protect the residents so they will not be removed from their homes. And this is happening right now during Ramadan, the month of fasting for the Muslim people. And, obviously in Ramadan, many Muslims go to the mosque and spend the night praying for forgiveness and such. And the authorities in apartheid Israel decided that this is a perfect time to instigate Palestinians to respond, and they've been attacking the Al-Aqsa Mosque for the past 2 days. Today, colonists from all across apartheid Israel have been gathering at the gates of the Aqsa Mosque, attempting to breach the mosque and colonize the mosque itself. So Palestinians have gathered and are fighting back since the morning. Around 400 people have been injured. The Israeli authorities, their goons, have been firing inside the mosque. They have fired through the stained glass, the historic stained glasses of the mosque to chase the Palestinians out who are defending it.
How many Palestinians are inside defending the mosque currently? Do you know?
Well, yesterday, the apartheid authorities attempted to kind of blockade all of Jerusalem, not to allow Palestinian citizens of apartheid Israel from the 1948 territories to come to Jerusalem, and Palestinians from the West Bank to come to Jerusalem. The last 10 days of Ramadan are the holiest days in the Muslim calendar. So what had happened is that even with the restrictions, and remember I just said the Israelis put blockades within what is now Israel to block their own citizens from entering Jerusalem. There was tens of buses of Palestinians going, as usual, at the end of Ramadan to pray in the mosque. And most of them just descended out of the buses that were being confiscated by the authorities and walked tens of kilometers on the highway, blocking the highway to get to Jerusalem. Last night, in the end, even with all the blockades and restrictions that the apartheid authorities attempted, around 90,000 Palestinians ended up reaching the mosque and praying and staying in it all night long. And since the morning, the occupation authorities have been attempting to expel them out of the mosque so they can escort the Jewish white supremacist colonists into the mosque to claim it as theirs.
Laith, I want to get a sort of background sense of what's actually happening here from you. With the people who are in the mosque, I can imagine this being some combination of resistance to the settlement process, genuine religious fervor, a kind of a tightly organized movement or loosely organized movement that some people, as they're organizing it, see is going to get a media response. There are different angles of this right here. This is a significant international event to the point where you're seeing it pop up pretty regularly in roundup news from around the world. And so, in other words, there are different ways that I can see the motivations or the intentions of the people who are engaging in the protest here and in the resistance to the settlement, to people taking their land effectively. What is the, if you had to look at the balance of different motivations there, why are they doing this? That's the sort of simple question that I'm asking here. What is this coming out of, and why are they doing it, Laith?
So the Palestinians are defending themselves. They have been left on their own by the international community, if you want to call it as such. Many of the Arab vessel states have normalized over the last few months. We were being told that this is going to bring peace, and what it actually resulted, this normalization and the what Trump gave to apartheid Israel, meaning giving them Jerusalem, giving them the Golan Heights, even acknowledging the settlements in the West Bank.
And the Abraham Accords, you could include that, diplomatic ties with other nations in the region. I think you mentioned that there. Anyway, like you were saying.
The whole intention of that was to make the Palestinians feel like that they are alone and to give up resistance. And what the Palestinians have proven in the past few days is that they are willing to defend their land, to defend the holy sites of Islam, to defend their own people with their bare hands, with their bare chests. So this is a clear indication that the Palestinians will not give up, even if the whole world gives up on them. Even if it's till the last child, they will fight back. And I want to be clear that this is telling us that apartheid Israel will end the same ending that apartheid South Africa ended with.
Well, I'm so curious on how far they're willing to take this. Meaning, I guess this goes into two questions, and the question is basically the same. If they're willing to basically give their last life to defend that patch of ground, then the question becomes, how many people are Israel willing to kill in order to take it? Meaning, how do you think this turns out? Just from your standpoint in regard to the way that you look at this stuff and you've seen it over the past X amount of time, how do you think this particular issue, because ultimately the question becomes, are they going to take the patch of land or not? And
well, look, maybe this is a great moment to quote Bob Marley. Have no fear for atomic energy, for none of them can stop the time. And this is the truth. Apartheid Israel has an atomic bomb, and it threatens the whole Arab people, not only Palestinians, all of the Muslim world, that it will use that nuclear weapon to guarantee the existence of an apartheid state based on Jewish white supremacy. And we are saying We have no fear of atomic energy. None of you can stop the time. And before them, just like before them, the Christian crusaders who occupied Palestine for 200 years, just like before them, the Romans who occupied Palestine for 600 years, they will all leave, and Palestine will come back to its rightful owners, and the Arab people will be unified.
I guess I'm curious, looking at this from the Palestinian perspective. Is the goal, if you have one, to change the Jewish public's opinion, the Israeli public's opinion in Israel? Is it to change domestic opinion, or is it to get intervention from foreign powers? What is the, if and you could also, of course, look at China and Russia ascending on that side of the globe, building up some kind of Eurasian bloc, and how significantly that's undoubtedly going to change Middle Eastern politics. Right now, if you had to have a goal, relating to this issue, how would you set it up? Which of those groups, again, would it be more domestic concerns in terms of Israel's political system, or is that just something that assumed to be impossible, shifting the Israeli public's opinion on this issue? Laith?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's never a good idea for a colonized people to put all their baskets into changing the opinion of the colonizer. And so we have had now 73 years of the Palestinian people using every means possible, from nonviolence to poetry to everything that you can think about, to try to convey their humanity. And that doesn't work because you're dealing with a supremacist group, the Zionists, who believe that God gave them the right to genocide a nation and to steal its land. This is the same language of the colonizers of the Americas when the British and the French and the Spanish arrived in the Americas and thought that God gave them the right to genocide others. And so there's no negotiation with that.
Is that what you believe the end goal is? Genocide? I mean, I was about to ask the question anyway, so you kind of jumped ahead of me. What do you think is the end goal? I mean, I look at the amount of water, for example, that is not potable, that can't be used. I look at the land that's being taken. You have basically the Palestinians being split into two separate sides. And it seems that there's not necessarily enough land for all of the people there. So the question becomes, if you guys are taking more land, meaning the Israelis, then what's the end goal? From your standpoint and from your point of view, do you believe the end goal is genocide?
Yes, the end goal has always been the genocide of the Palestinians. I mean, the 1948 Nakba, the catastrophe, the expulsion of 75% of the Palestinians from their land, that was a genocide. And if it was in their power, the Zionists would have genocided all of the Palestinians at that moment. They are continuing to do so in a slower manner, in a more camouflaged manner that comes out every once in a while in a clearer way, as we're seeing right now. But to be very clear, the Palestinians want to have a democratic right to their land. And therefore, the only outcome that is possible is a referendum for all those who live within the historic territory of Palestine, from the river to the sea, that will end the Jewish supremacist state. And this is normal. People, it's really weird to hear some Jewish people, let's say in the United States, speak about a secular state and not wanting to have a Christian supremacist state, but then turn around and say, I want to have a Jewish state in Palestine where I have supremacy over others. And so the ultimate goal is an end to Jewish supremacy and the colonial project in Palestine.
Why don't you believe, and we only have 30 seconds, that the rest of the world doesn't see it as a Jewish apartheid state? Do you think it's just affiliation with the United States? Do you think it's the United States uses Israel as an attack dog? What do you think it is?
Well, look, I think the majority of humanity, and probably something in the 80-somewhat% of humanity, all see Israel as an apartheid state based on Jewish supremacy. Even in Canada or the United States.
You're right. Absolutely right. I use this as a Western perspective. You're totally right. Liath Marouf is an award-winning multimedia producer and broadcasting law consultant. You can follow him on @Liath Marouf on Twitter and his website, cmacenter.org. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am your ever vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And that means you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, let's get to the headlines. In the news, more than 22,300 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, with just under 250 deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of 41,057 cases per day, a decrease of 30% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 34% of the American public has been fully vaccinated, and 46% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected more than 32,736,063 people across the United States and has killed 581,302 people. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is under increasing pressure to impose a national lockdown as the country today experienced 366,000 new cases, one of the worst days this weekend. The country's health ministry has reported 3,754 virus-related deaths today, after 2 days of the above 4,000 deaths per day. One of America's largest pipelines, which carries fuel up Texas or from Texas to New York, was hit by a ransomware cyber attack on Friday, shutting down its over 5,000 miles of pipeline. Administration officials said they believe the responsible party was a criminal organization, not a state, although, according to CNN and anonymous sources, the criminal organization is based in Russia, known as Dark Side. Spooky. The Biden administration said it's working with the pipeline to prepare future attacks. House Republicans are set to vote this week on whether or not to replace Liz Cheney as House Republican Conference Chair. Israeli police fired stun grenades and rubber bullets at Palestinians in one of the most sensitive corners of Jerusalem near Al-Aqsa Mosque. Events fell on Jerusalem Day. The death toll in the capital of Afghanistan soared to 50 following a school bombing. Al-Shabaab says it's behind the attack in Mogadishu. A BBC investigation found that more than 40,000 people in the Philippines are reported to have been employed to run British company hiring temporary workers in the UK as part of a tax avoidance scheme. A right-wing French newspaper has published a second letter warning that the country is headed towards a civil war. It was signed anonymously. Elon Musk headlined Saturday Night Live this weekend, the first host of Saturday Night Live to open up about Asperger's syndrome. Gene editing, the first recipient of the new CRISPR technique, is involved editing genes while inside the human body, says they're doing well. Patients are genetically blind. And those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. This is very interesting. So, as I was reading the ransomware attack, and I said to myself, I know they're going to say Russia or China. And what do you know? Based in Russia and called Darkseid. Darkseid is a comic book villain that is beyond the multiverse. Meaning, when there's like multiple versions of Superman, there's only one Darkseid. If that makes sense. Like, so think of like you have a multiverse and you have all of these different versions of Superman, Batman, and everybody else. But then within the context of the multiverse, you have beings that live
between the dimensions.
Yes.
Exactly.
And it's like, there's only one of Darkseid. I love the naming of these things, Darkseid, whatever. But I knew, I was like, Russia's going to come up. And lo and behold, Russia.
I was actually, the first version of that story I saw wasn't blaming Russia, and I was left feeling a little bit disappointed. It's true. But
the one time Russia is not mentioned, and lo and behold, they're going to find a way to put them in. I thought it was either going to be Russia or China. I was like, wow. They've just said it was a secondary rogue group, rogue organization, but lo and behold, here we are, Russia.
Yeah, you shouldn't let any of these ones go to waste. If you get it blamed for, if you have any cyber attack, and whatever your position, whether you're the leader of a country or just a random citizen of one of those countries, you should blame another country, because you'll suddenly have all of the FBI, the CIA, the media at your back. It's a good position to be in. The gene editing thing is cool too. I've got to say, cool. There's the last headline. These are patients who are genetically blind. Some of them are only able to see. If you think about how horrible this would be, you hold your arm out and you think of something about the head of a pen or a pencil, the size of a quarter inch or third of an inch across, and that's what they can see. For some reason, their retinas are messed up to the point where they can only see a little pinprick in space, and they're undergoing, again, sort of in-person CRISPR therapy, gene therapy. The first time this has happened with the genetic mutations induced by CRISPR taking place inside their bodies, not outside in a petri dish or something.
That's so weird.
That is the thing. Yeah, it is on real-time genetic manipulation.
So they're being followed, I would imagine, by doctors to make sure that it's not going awry.
Oh yeah.
If it goes awry, then what?
Well, the assumption is they signed away enough liability protection law that nobody has to worry about millions of dollars as these people completely lose their sense of sight. That's the corporate-friendly perspective.
So they're thinking that the worst is that they just lose their sense of sight, not like mutations.
That's the hope. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about dark side and dimensional travel a couple minutes ago, so that could come in here somewhere, but I kind of doubt it.
Well, I'm just thinking of, like, are they going to throw a third arm? And I know that sounds out there, but and I'm being hyperbolic, just from the standpoint of, are they going to get mutations? Like, is this where Spider-Man and this type of stuff come into our universe?
I'll put it like this. It would be great if out of all of the fiction movies, all of the superheroes, at least one of them could actually at some point happen. You just think statistically, with all of the different narratives that like Marvel and DC and these companies have come up with, that at least like one of those things is just actually going to happen, just because they've covered enough of the ground of the kinds of things that could happen. But no, I don't know about anybody becoming Spider-Man due to this CRISPR technique. It's intense, though. Hopefully, they don't get the cerebral venous sinus thrombosis, that blood clot. Although, again, that's associated with the vaccine, specifically the adenovirus ones, the non-mRNA ones. It's a weird era for genetic engineering. We're going to see a lot more of that stuff, I believe, as a result of this pandemic specifically. Think about this. Within a year and a half, they were able to scale out a technology that they'd had kind of sitting in the garage for over a decade. They'd known how to do mRNA for a long time, but it wasn't feasible, and it wasn't working with the older types of viruses that we were testing it on. Anyway, they basically prototyped that technology and then launched that around the world within the span of about a year and a half, to the point where that now seems to be the safest type of vaccine and the one that most people are willing to get. That's a testament to something. Yeah. That is actually an accomplishment.
And it's not even a vaccine. It's kind of like soy milk. It's like they're making it a vaccine just for the sake of being a vaccine. They're basically telling your cell, go do this. And your cell says, okay. But that could be, go clear up cancer. Go get rid of the stuff. I mean, there was a scientist that was supposedly using this to get rid of, what was it? It was, what is the brain thing? With the brain...
Parkinson's?
Yeah. I think it was Parkinson's, right. Yeah. And again, this is phenomenal. I mean, they're basically giving your cell instructions. Yes. And that technology can be useful. I don't want to say limitless, because clearly there are limits. I don't think it's going to help people to grow wings. But from the standpoint of illness and disease, yeah. I mean, that's an extraordinary thing to be able to tell a cell, do X or to do Y. I mean, basically we're saying do a vaccine, and it worked.
It's a weird kind of self-knowledge. I don't want to get too deep into the philosophy, but think about this for a second. You're acquiring the technologies with which you can communicate with the most basic building blocks of all life itself. Genetics, if it's going to, what is DNA? It is the string of proteins that continues on between all known life forms, as far as I can tell. Exactly. It's all one sort of big branching, mutating tendrils coming off of the original, whatever, quasi-DNA, proto-DNA, you know what I mean, the early amino acid building blocks. Anyway, it's all part of this same sort of thing. If you can communicate with that, if you can control that and manipulate that, that is the fear. And it's also kind of cool to talk about. But again, you're communicating with life at its most foundational and basic levels. what it would be great to have on in terms of a guest, we should really talk to somebody. We've talked about mRNA a bunch recently. We haven't really gone into CRISPR, but what you're seeing is the opening up of an array of different viable genetic engineering technologies, which I don't think we've actually had, where we're now talking about curing major diseases. You have multiple techniques that you can use for different purposes. So finding an expert and talking to an expert about, you see what where I'm going with this. How would you use each one? What can you do in the combination of them? What are other ones we see potentially coming out? That whole conversation, because that's going to be a big thing.
What is it look like in 20 years?
Yeah.
I mean, 30 years. I mean, we're talking about telling cells what to do. I mean, it's hard to get across potential for that. Cancer, AIDS. I mean, man. I mean, kidney disease. It's like all of these different illnesses that have plagued humanity. And now you get the ability to be able, meaning the moment that you say, okay, we have the capacity to contact the cell or communicate with it, then the rest of it is just figuring out how to, I would imagine, arrange it in a way that gets across the thing that you want it to do. And so it's like that becomes a challenge. But, beforehand, the challenge was just solving, okay, how do we communicate with the cell? Like it's these little steps that take place in humanity. It's us. It's our achievements. I mean, that's something to be proud of. And I know we don't necessarily have something to scale it with because, there's nothing outside of us that we know of where we can kind of compare that stuff to. But we are inching our way along. And look, do you get to the point where you cure death? I mean, we assume death is a given, but that's an assumption. There's all sorts of things we assume as a given. Hey, human beings can't fly. It's impossible for human beings ever to get into the air. And then the Wright brothers was like, well, no. Well, it's impossible for us to hit the speed barrier. Well, no. Earth is the center of the earth. No. Like all of these things, even physical matter reality, even that, where it's like, well, clearly physical matter reality is solid. Well, no, most of it, 99.9% is just empty space. Like all of these things that we've considered to be real at some point have found itself to be false and is end of death, one of those things. I mean, again, if you get to the point where they say, hey, you can stop the telomerase from falling off, it'll be like, maybe. Catch is, do people really want that?
I think a lot of people do. But this is also one of the big rallying cries. What'd you say?
They want it until they don't.
Well, and that's where death starts to become kind of funny. No, I mean, and then there are questions about whether death is actually inevitable. The heat death of the universe, for instance, that's a pretty good later limit that often people will use. But that's, you're talking unseeable immensities of time. You're not talking anything like you're talking who knows how many trillions of years effectively into some infinitely receding. Anyway, that's one bound of possibility. Another is we've seen a lot of motion over the last couple of days. The Society for Engineered Senescence. That's not right. Exactly. Engineered senescence. They're trying to sort of limit and control the aging process. Senescence. SENS. They've done good work. There are a number of sort of, we should get somebody on about this too. Now that we're back in the studio, I'm feeling very suddenly like we should talk to this person, we should talk to that person. This is what it's like to be back in real life again, apparently.
Oh, by the way, my wife, she wanted Jupiter Legacy. That's one of those. So every so often, there will be something where I'll be like, Shane, you got to watch it. He never watches. So like Tenet, for example, it's like, Shane, you got to watch Tenet. He's never watched Tenet. And anybody who watches the show knows that Shane would love Tenet. So much so, my mom was watching it yesterday and she hit me up. She says, I'm trying to explain it and I can't explain it. It's so wild. It's such a good show. But Jupiter Legacy is another one of those good sci-fi shows where think of if superheroes were in real life, what would it be? And what would they think? How would they engage the world? Like if they had kids, for example, and let's say none of superheroes existed before, and all of a sudden, let's say they were granted cosmic powers. Like, what would that look like? And what would be the responsibility? Like, it is such a good series where these guys are like trying to raise kids that are superheroes.
We covered everything. We came full circle to entertainment. I was thinking we should talk Elon Musk with SNL, but, this is just adjacent to it. Jupiter's Legacy. This is a very timely recommendation.
Good. It's so good.
This started like 4 days ago or 3 days ago.
It's recent. It's very recent. I mean, these guys got cosmic powers all of a sudden. They have no idea why they started. They have no idea why they were given the powers. And they came up with a rule set of like, we don't kill and we don't engage. We just inspire. Because their thought was, if we get too far engaged, then we will have to take the responsibility of government and everything else. And do we really want that? Meaning, do we want to take it all over? Like, do we want to become Superman going insane after Lois Lane died and just say, okay, I'm taking over Earth. There's going to be no more crime, no more violence. And then, reign of violence starts. Like, and their point was, we don't want that. So their thought was, we'll inspire. And they don't get involved in the Second World War. They don't get involved in Vietnam. They don't get involved in Korea. And it's like, man, we should have gotten involved in the Second World War. I have feelings about that. When they dropped the bomb, we could have stopped. Like, all of these talks come up. And there's this interregnum where they're one guy's like, no, we should get more involved. And that guy is trying to take power.
Yeah.
The leader.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
It's so good.
I bet the TV show, if the plot, it's probably going to have as the backdrop plot that, like, that's changing.
Yeah,
that the superheroes are now deciding to get involved. That there's this
because
conflict
the world isn't getting
them.
better.
No, exactly.
From their standpoint, the world is going to pot, and they were like, "All right, we got to get involved. Something needs to take place." And the other guy's like, "I don't know what's going on. This isn't working, et cetera, et cetera." Inspiring, he's not doing. And then people are asking him questions like, "Why aren't you saving him? Well, the bad guys are killing people. Why aren't you getting involved?"
Yes, yeah.
And it's like, that guy killed that guy, and you don't want to. And that's the big thing, right? The bad guys are killing people, and the good guys' rule is we don't kill. And so the good guy takes all of this extra work not to kill the guy, despite the fact that the bad guys are killing other people. And they're like, look, dude, your rule is not working. You need to change. The environment is changing. You need to change. It's a really good show. It's a really interesting show. We should have an entertainment segment. I guess that's my point.
That sounds good.
You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment with the one Talenix.
Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and digs straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station from Washington, D.C. If you guys are in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So there's this interesting fight that's taken on. If you guys watch mainstream media on CNN, MSNBC, or for that matter, even a little bit on Fox, there's been this fight about Liz Cheney. Now, Liz Cheney, if I'm not mistaken, is the third Republican in line. And Liz Cheney would not shut up about one thing: the putsch attempt, that Donald Trump didn't win. And despite the fact that Liz Cheney voted with Donald Trump in some ungodly amount, it doesn't matter. That one issue is the thing. If you are not on board with Trump, then the Republican Party doesn't seem to be on board with you. Mainstream media has talked this up, while Fox News has basically been telling Cheney to shut up. Even Lindsey Graham, let's play this clip. Lindsey Graham is even telling Liz Cheney to shut up. Let's play this clip.
Just say to my Republican colleagues, can we move forward without President Trump? The answer is no. I've always liked Liz Cheney, but she's made a determination that the Republican Party can't grow with President Trump. I've determined we can't grow without him. All of these people like Herschel Walker and all the people you just named are attracted to the Trump Republican Party. Economic populism, America First agenda. If you don't get that as a Republican, you're making the biggest mistake in the history of the Republican Party. The reason our party, just say to my Republican colleagues,
right there.
Can we move forward?
This gets to my argument of why I say you can break people. Is Donald Trump and the changing of the guard in regards to what the Republican dogma is into this kind of populism, whatever that means, is that the breaking of the Republican Party, where they've come to something different in order to compete. In order to have a conversation, we're joined with Tyler Nixon. Tyler Nixon is archivist, activist, technologist, and legal counsel to the one and only Roger Stone. Tyler, what's going on, man?
Good morning, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Yes.
So let me ask you, what? Man, I have so many questions on this one because this is fascinating to me. So let me ask you this: is it possible to move forward without Trump? And on top of that, what does it mean to be a Trump Republican? Because it seems like all of these guys are getting on board the Trump Republican bandwagon, whatever that means. But what does it mean?
Well, I think you sort of alluded to it. You talked about it, is this changing the Republican Party? I think what the Republican Party is capable of, because it has to, which we don't see in the Democrat Party, is to evolve. Evolve according to, and I'm going to say evolve, I mean politically evolve to meet the challenges, to meet the opposition. And let's face it, I mean, the Republicans are held to a different standard than Democrats are. I mean, the only reason Liz Cheney is even being heard by anybody is because the propaganda arm of the Democrat Party, also known as the mainstream media at this point, the major, quote, networks, are busy, giving her the broadest and loudest platform possible because she finally, came out against Donald Trump and is of course bucking against the main of the Republican Party. So of course she's a darling to the media. I mean, I don't even call it media, really. I mean, it's just straight propaganda now. It's just straight, gaslighting the country with just complete talking points right out of the DNC, right out of the Biden White House. And the bottom line is this. I mean, the Republican Party was under Bush-Cheney, under Liz Cheney's father, was a neocon globalist, warmongering sort of, capitalist pig type of party.
And so generationally, she has come out of that, and she's representing it, and she is like a woman standing before Goliath or something like that, as a single figure standing up to the weight of the Republican Party. Now, here's the thing. You brought up how the Democrats failed to change. Jamarl just sort of set off the mic. I don't mean to miss. You said you think they have. But here's the thing. Biden...
Even in rhetoric. I think they've changed in rhetoric. I mean, I think from their standpoint, they've said, all right, we need to tweak ourselves on some level. And I think the dialogue coming out of Biden has been a tick to the left. And I think Republicans have had a hard time dealing with that. And I think Trump gives the best chance.
I think that the Republicans are weak after January 6th. I think that they were taken over and taken off their stride by Trump, who came in as an insurgent, independently wealthy, populist political figure. If Sanders had been similarly independently wealthy, if he'd had hundreds of millions of dollars in a war chest to throw at a campaign, he could have taken the DNC nomination and even the seat of the presidency. And I think that, in that sliding door universe, that could very easily happen. But as it is, the DNC was able to push yet another rival contender out. The Republican Party wasn't. And so the Republicans are shifted by Trump, but they're also in their own way immensely weak. Each party is quite weak. The Democrats, because they have too much old blood, and the Republicans, because of the attempted coup, or whatever word you want to use for it, what happened on January 6th, the breach of the Capitol building. Tyler, agree, disagree? Where do you think Trump is, if you had to put it into a couple of words, where do you think Trump is taking the Republican Party?
Well, I can't agree with the assessment that January 6th means a damn in the long term. I mean, let's face it, the country was lied to and gaslit, as I just alluded, about the entire thing. I mean, we were told about this martyred Capitol Hill police officer. I mean, I just looked at the New York Times as a headline up, officer murdered, and whatever. They still have the story up. I mean,
Brian
this man died of natural
You're talking about Brian Sicknick.
Yes, correct. I mean, Pelosi called him a martyr. I mean, the Republicans were pilloried as though it's a monolithic block that some yahoos down at the Capitol raised hell. You know, oh my God, you know, like let's. It's just the worst thing since the Civil War, right?
Well, but
give me a break.
Here's the thing. I was thinking about that this morning, and I think that it has actually weakened them. I don't know. I mean, and I'm not saying permanently. I'm not saying that they're hamstrung. And I thought that I will, show my political lack of grace. I thought that Trump was out of the running up until CPAC when he led and had a golden, again, we were joking earlier this morning, had a golden idol wheeled around the halls of the conference while it was going on. That is not out of power by any metric. So I got that wrong, admittedly. But on this side of on this side of what happened on January 6th, do you not see that they're weakened? Before I pass it back to you, I was thinking that this morning because the Republican pushback is about the same as it ever was. It's not particularly Trumpian. The pushback about Democrats trying to pass expensive bills and the radicalism, not only is that not in touch with Trump necessarily, where he might be a little bit more heavy-handed on the economic policies too, but it's also just the same standard pushback. It feels like they are not able to explore because they burnt their social capital after January 6th and the response to it, clinging to Donald Trump, even though he suborned the whole protest thing. Anyway, Tyler, what's your take?
Well, I mean, I think, the only people who care about January 6th are, frankly, the people who want to use it, just like the Russia hoax, as a bludgeon, a phony bludgeon against the entire party generally, and Trump specifically. Look, I mean, I refer you to 1994. I refer you to 2010. The Republicans don't have to do much except sit back and watch the Democrats implode the economy, as we see, with prices skyrocketing on everything. We have gas prices up upwards of, in some cases, 50%. Plus, we just have the pipeline break.
Are you really going to use gas?
White House.
Are you going to gas? You're going to blame Biden for gas?
Biden? Well, I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm going by the Democrats' own standard. Whoever's the man in the job, he's responsible for all the COVID deaths and everything else under the sun that's happened since January 20th.
Come on.
Let's be. Well, I mean, the prices have skyrocketed on everything. Everything has gone up. Inflation. I mean, and let's face it, this was the Democrats' pandemic. I mean, all their shutdowns.
How is it the Democrats' pandemic? Look, Donald Trump was in charge when 500,000 Americans went up in flames. And then at the end of the process, Donald Trump ended.
Let's not Fauci this conversation.
Nobody's Fauci.
There's been so many versions of reality with this thing. People did not die. I mean, they rigged those.
People didn't die?
The morbidity, the average age was, 78 years old?
So what? Those are still human beings.
On the so-called COVID deaths, I mean, the numbers were so... I mean, I remember here in Colorado, they had to eliminate, and this is maybe 6 months in, they had to remove something like 28% of the death statistics alone on reported COVID deaths because they were things like, alcohol poisoning. Everything was COVID. I mean, the flu has disappeared. I mean, really. I mean, let's get to reality.
But here's the thing. I've heard constant claims that the numbers are miscounted, that the count is off, and those arguments can hold some weight. But at the same time, you've had a crazy excess mortality, which I don't know how you would seriously account for.
No. Excess mortality. We've had less mortality overall than in the previous 2 years.
No,
So that's not at all true. That this is some black plague on the country. I mean, regardless of whether you agree what the actual impact is of this virus, the fact is the reaction to it and what was done in supposedly attempts to curb it, which we find out the more draconian the lockdowns and so forth. Those are the states that have the highest death rates, and
they're also the states that have the most tightly packed urban populations. I can argue this every which way, and I am sympathetic to people who say that the lockdowns have caused a permanent reduction in the citizens' ability to relate meaningfully to their government, to push back against government control of their literal movement, identity, whether it's vaccine passports, whatever. I can buy those arguments to a certain extent, to the point where I'm willing to engage with them honestly, completely. But I don't buy into it. And on that last point specifically, again, the states that have had to implement the lockdowns and have seen high case counts and death counts, part of the reason for that is that these are the densely populated states in the first place. They're the ones who have the reason and the need to shut it down. If New York City hadn't shut down, I don't see how well it would have. It didn't do well. If you remember, it was the first site of the epidemic. Some of these places learned and some of them didn't. And that just seems to be how it played out. Anyway, that was not exactly what we were planning on bringing you on to talk about, but always happy to get into that conversation. We are joined by Tyler Nixon. We got to go into a break. We will be back on the other side of this. Tyler is an archivist, not an anarchist. Archivist, activist.
I'm an anarchist. That's correct.
Okay, it rolled off the tongue, but I didn't want to misattribute. But with that, anarchist, archivist, activist, technologist, legal counsel to Roger Stone. You can follow Tyler on Twitter at @RealTylerNixon. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back with Tyler on the other side of this short break. Be right back.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we continue to be joined by Tyler Nixon, archivist, activist, technologist, and legal counsel to Roger Stone. And by the way, you can follow Tyler on Twitter at @RealTylerNixon. Tyler, I'm getting back into the meat of this conversation. We got into starting last segment. I want to ask the question, specifically with Trump, what does the Republican Party stand for? What are their policies? What are they pushing for? What is their pushback against the Democrats? If you had to give me a roadmap from here to 2022 and 2024, who are the Republicans? What do they believe in? And what are they fighting for? Tyler?
I think the Republican Party stands for return to, what we have now is a medical martial law surveillance police state that's rising up in Washington, D.C. You see the use of private firms to end-run laws against, surveillance of citizens. You see a chilling level of authoritarianism in the sort of the monolithic left, or the Democrat establishment, I guess you would call it, in Washington, D.C., that just has no problem with demonizing, vilifying, turning into criminals or criminalizing dissent to their policies. So, you start with that as a touchstone. I think that's easily, touches on also the lockdowns, the draconian lockdowns, the mask mandates, all the sort of medical martial law type stuff that people just are not going to persist with. You look at the education, the impact on education. There is a rising rebellion. You see people, especially people, young people from the Generation Z, who are anywhere from age, say, 14 to whatever in college, who have seen their lives utterly disrupted for something that, with their own eyes before them, do not see as some sort of pandemic, as some sort of plague, as something that requires their lives to be utterly disrupted and destroyed in many cases.
We see that now, but Tyler, where I'm going with this is, will we see that in 2022? It seems like we turned a corner in a big way on this, and with the rollout of the vaccines, case numbers are now crazy low compared to where they were over the winter.
Right.
So do you think that's actually still going to be a big issue in 2022 next year?
Look, I think the whole thing and the economic fallout from it, I think, and the Democrat policies that, this absolute orgy of just, complete profligacy with no limits on anything that is not going to end up doing what, they claim, infrastructure and things like that. Nobody's going to see any of the impact of that. The meager checks that are handed out. Let's face it, the Democrats are a fascist corporate party right now. They eclipse the Republicans in terms of, the Bush-Cheney Republicans in terms of their being in bed with billionaires and being in bed with huge, mega corporations, and don't mind snuffing out small businesses with their lockdowns and the draconian measures that were taken.
Tyler, Trump calls the lockdown. You know that, right? I mean, it was Trump that needed.
Jamarl, please, let's be real here. The states did it. I mean, I live in Colorado. Governor Jared Polis, Democrat. Andrew Cuomo. What's her name in Michigan?
No, I get that.
And Newsom. I mean, Newsom's about to face a recall because he has been so, they've been so doctrinaire about these lockdowns, and so just love power and love having this control over people's lives. You can blame Trump all day long, but he is no longer on the scene as far as the congressional races coming up in 2020.
No, you're right. Trump is no longer on the scene.
There's going to be a massive wave of revulsion, as there has been,
Tyler,
against the Democrat Party, and they're going to lose Congress, probably the Senate as well.
Trump is no longer on the scene. And because he's no longer on the scene, the vaccines have rolled out perfectly fine, and the numbers are going down, and there's been a change. So the catch becomes...
Oh, wait, the Trump vaccine, you mean? The Trump...
I have no idea what the Trump vaccine is. What I do know is that there was a certain degree of competence that rolled it out, as opposed to 500,000 that died under Trump.
Came up with the vaccine because Trump, you're just disavowing the Trump...
I'm not disavowing the fact that Trump exists.
But this would be an interminable debate.
Yeah.
There's nowhere because I could understand each party making its side. Trump had Operation Warp Speed, but pretty much all of the actual application of the vaccines since Trump rolled them out in mid to late December of last year, and since Biden took over in mid-January, you had only a month of Trump vaccines being delivered, if I want to use that word. But it was a Biden delivery process, and so the debate, I don't see how you. I just don't see how you move past that debate, I guess.
Right, that's
right. I mean, I'm just, if you want to talk like, whatever the narrative is that's coming out of, the DNC and so forth. I mean, that's.
Are you really going to castigate what we're saying as a narrative from the Democratic Party? Well, I mean, I don't think we're being grotesquely unfair. Better yet, let's do this.
Look, we can sit and talk numbers, or you can talk the political realities on the ground.
Right. Let's talk political realities. What does the Republican Party stand for specifically, policy standpoint?
I just told you. I said it's going to be.
That's all opposition to the Republicans.
Democrat excesses. It's going to be for securing, frankly, the voting process, where this ridiculous, where you. I mean, it's laughable to think that the Republicans are standing in the way. I mean, you had illegal, frankly, unconstitutional changes made by executives and judges.
So when you say securing the voting process, what do you mean? Because Democrats said they're securing the voting process with the law to expand transparency and expand the number of people that can vote.
Transparency.
Yeah.
I mean, let's see what happens in Arizona. Why, if they're so sure of their victory, why are they sending armies of lawyers, led by Mark Elias, a criminal, into Arizona to attempt to quash the current audit that's going on in America?
Because they don't trust the audit.
Why wouldn't they embrace that?
Well, they don't trust the people who are doing the audit.
But wouldn't this all be a politically out of date? I admit in 2022 this is still going to be relevant. But Tyler, in 2024, wouldn't this be ancient history in some sense? Like at that point, if what the Republicans are doing and their pushback against the Democrats is the same thing they're doing today, I don't know, man. It just doesn't seem like that would be going anywhere. Now, I'm not asking you to pull out a magic 8-ball or try to prognosticate or something like that, because I don't know how effectively we could do that. But in terms of trends or things like that, if it's still just pushing back against what the Democrats did in 2020 and 2021, then that's where the conversation will have been left, unless what you're worried about is that the Democrats are going to use their majority, they're going to use their power to do ever more of this in the next couple of years, in which case we're going to have a lot more to push back against at that point. Where would you fall on that, Tyler?
Well, I mean, I think the bottom line is this. I would urge you to, I mean, if you believe that the Democrats defeated Trump, what were they but the anti-Trump for 4 years? Name one thing they proposed or did, or their path forward, other than the usual, big government, and now police state level, sort of profligacy. I mean, talk about Bernie Sanders. I mean, Bernie Sanders would probably more represent the core and the base of the Democrat Party than either of the two last nominees. But
Agreed.
He was screwed out of it. He was screwed out of it by the Democrat establishment and their manipulations.
100% agreement there, Tyler. That may be the first time 100% agreement across the board. But
well, I mean, what I mean, I think people think that Trump's this anomaly. No, Trump has tapped into what has been, we've not had since really Ronald Reagan any Republican nominee that's truly represented what the base of the party stands for, which is our actual non-Washington based values in terms of governance, deference to the democracy experiments that are every one of the 50 states, and giving autonomy to people on a local level, getting the government the hell out of people's business, whether it be especially in terms of business itself. I mean, taxation, the excessive taxation and regulation that goes on. I mean, the agenda of the Democrats is so overweening. It's just, I mean, in addition to the impact and the fallout of this giant pandemic, excess overkill. It's just, I mean, I don't see why we should have to lay out some explicit agenda other than to say, first of all, let's put a halt to all this insanity and profligacy that's going on right now.
I guess because you have to put something out that competes with Democrats.
Conflict arise too. I mean, I'm sure they would love to have another war on their. I mean, and this is where Liz Cheney comes into the equation.
I mean, I want some actual solutions. Yeah. I want some real deep solutions to the problems. I want us to immediately change our foreign policy, to stop invading other countries, to pull out internationally. I want a serious reconsideration of the state of our economy, how it relates to all the expenditures on our military. I want a public, ongoing, active conversation about cutting down military spending and taking that and putting it into the economy. I want a set of sweeping perspectives, and then I want to get some policies in place that get those perspectives enshrined in our political system. But Trump was held back at every damn turn by his own choices. Whether you're talking about John Bolton or Mike Pompeo, with whom he stuck to the end, that was him too. So I don't see that in Trump, to be blunt. But do you, Tyler?
Oh no, I mean, look, Trump was very frustrating, and let's face it. I mean, it was a piling on. I mean, who could he really turn to? And it's one of the things I said early on, and he actually repeated it several months. Trump himself said, and I said, this guy, he may think he knows New York real estate as being a cutthroat sort of ruthless game, but I said that is nothing compared to Washington D.C. politics. I mean, he was undermined left, right, and center, frankly, from the beginning. I mean, they packed the National Security Agency's staff, National Security Council staff, Rhodes did, with like 100+ Obama zealots, and we saw that,
and they leak constantly. Constantly. Anytime Trump wanted to do something.
With the Vindman, leaking presidential phone calls and recasting. Trump was just, I mean, he had no idea what he was getting himself into.
No, he didn't. But he was in a political climate. And to be fair, when you look at the standpoint of Biden, I mean, look, this is what we're getting at. Because our thing is, the Republican Party does have to put something out to compete with Democrats. Otherwise, they're just going to run the roost. And my argument is they need to change in order to compete, which is why on some level believe that whatever they're going to take from Trump, they need to actually take it. And I don't necessarily believe they have. So right here, in the fourth month of the presidency, Biden's overall approval rating sits at 63%. When it comes to new Democratic presidents' handling of the pandemic, 71% approve, 47% Republicans. Now, Trump was getting far, far weaker numbers on that. Right here, the AP North poll also shows an uptick for the Americans' optimism in the country. I guess what I'm getting at is Biden, whatever you want to think of him, whether you want to think is high taxes, whether you want to think is authoritarian, whatever you want to think of him, the American public looks at him and says he's competent. Even if he's not altogether there, at the very least, he is competent in the way that he's going about this. And his policies that he's putting forth, even if you want to call it high tax and spend everything else, the American public says 500,000 of us died. We like it. And the Republicans, in order to compete, would have to put something up that competes against it. So it's not me that's just pressing on you. It's the fact that you have a political party that has decided we're competing with China, and in the competition with China, we need to invest in the American public and we need to raise taxes in order to pay for it. That's what it boils down to. Now, the Republicans can either accept it, fight it, or pretend it doesn't exist. Now, the catch is, what are they going to do in order to compete? That's the question.
We're really citing opinion polls. I mean, the media that puts these things out are complete liars. They're demonstrable propagandists.
Nothing's real. There's no spoon.
Yeah, frankly, no. It's what I mean. I live in Colorado, but what I see and hear is people are not. There's no kind of belief that Biden's competent in anything. There's just sort of oh well, what do we do? What can we do? I mean, this was steamrolled onto the country. I mean, the man won supposedly 10 million more votes, I guess, than Trump was. But but Trump won half of the counties, the key counties. I mean, look. I mean, just the bottom line is, if you can listen to the narrative, and you talk about Trump being approval, talk approval ratings, Biden has had his what licked by the media and by every single mainstream organization.
That is true, which makes me believe that it's more accurate.
Year, I mean, Trump was literally being assaulted before he was even sworn in with an entirely despicable hope.
Tyler, I agree with you. I totally agree with you.
I mean, if you want to just talk opinion polls, if that's our standard, what I'm saying is
they can be some standard.
Factors.
They can be some, if we're not living in a Gnostic, benighted world where we have no access to information and we're ruled above by dark gods. We do, admittedly, there is a lot of fake news out there, and there's a lot of misinformation, and you have to take that into account in the same way that you would if you were hearing gossip at the Village Square, because increasingly the journalistic, field has been diminished to that level, and we're all on the same page when it comes to that stuff. But you also have to have conversations about things, and broadly, opinion polls can be instructive. Anyway, Tyler, we're almost out of time. I guess what would be great is if there were some meaningful conversation going on a deep level. It seems like Biden, his policies were at least at first cast as a response to Trump. Now they have become go nowhere, high budget. I would argue a relatively low impact to the amount of money they would be costing. Bills that are kind of dominating our political discourse. Well, some people want dramatically more, whether it's a $15 an hour minimum wage or just simply, larger help with people. And then the Trump response, the Republican response to that is a little bit disoriented, but at the same time, it's this sort of same thing mirrored back at them. Absolute revulsion with the state of the other party, complete rejection of the other leader, and incidentally, a rejection of the outcome of the election too, on this really deep level. In other words, neither party, each party is responding to and sort of doing the opposite of what the other one is doing here, and neither seems to be coming up with good leadership, good new policies, good new bills. I don't know. I don't want to just scream up to the sky in too much vein here, Tyler. We've got to go to a break. Any last comments on this? Any last thoughts, or do you just disagree there?
Sure. No, I look, I mean, American politics is at a complete ebb in terms of the ability of anything to get done that's real and productive. You have this loggerheads. What we have are warring tribal clans at this point, for vying for power. And I think the American public is just very much tuned out to it to the extent they can be. And look, I mean, it's 3 months since Trump left, 4 months since Trump left office. The notion that the Republicans have to come up with some sort of grand master plan in just that time, I think is a bit ambitious. I mean, let's at least try to have the same standard for both parties.
I would hope that Trump would have one if he were talking right now. If we were hearing from him, not just on his own website. I think it was donaldjtrump.com/desk or something like that, I think is the address. But I'll admit, it's not like it's on Twitter. I haven't checked it. He has his own platform, but he has been effectively deplatformed. But I would like to think that if he hadn't been, or if he were speaking volubly, he would be talking about his policies on his, because this is a crucial period. If Democrats are failing in all these ways, and if the American people would love a meaningful response to that, now is the time to draft that response. We need to go to a break. I'm not trying to lean on you too much, not trying to lean on you to come up with the entire agenda for the party, Tyler. If you do that, I think they should pay you for it. Tyler Nixon, archivist, activist, technologist, legal counsel to Roger Stone. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Hey, thanks, guys. Have a great week.
Hey, you too. For those listening, that was Tyler Nixon. You can follow him on Twitter @RealTylerNixon. And you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into a break, taking calls when we come back. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. We'll be back with you on the other side of this short break.
Lines.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik.
Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
And we are back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. The phone number is 202-521-1320. Again, that is 202-521-1320. We are back in the studio, and I'm having a good time, although it is surreal, again, to be in here. I realized, Jamarl, we got to go to our callers. You know how you have dreams, and then you have, like, places you'll sometimes come back to in your dream?
Yeah.
It's weird because I can tell that I've dreamed a lot about the Sputnik studio over the last year while I've been away. And now that I'm here, it is positively surreal.
Yeah.
It is a very strange sensation.
I don't think I've dreamed the studio.
I don't even remember it, but I can feel it. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think I've dreamt it. No, I don't think I've dreamt it. It's weird being back here, though. I mean, it's having to get up, get on the subway, get here, or tram, get all of that process again. And it's like your juices are flowing and everything else. I'm a better person when I'm active like that, even though it's far more comfortable to, just going to roll out of bed, go down to the studio and do the news.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's more invigorating, I guess, to be in studio with the headphones on and everything else.
Yeah.
No, it's an interesting experience, but surreal, yes.
It
Because
definitely.
it's been, what, a year?
It has been about a year.
And this is
more than
our
that.
first time in studio together doing the show.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's very, very weird having a great time doing it today.
It was like 14 months ago. We left in early March, I believe it would have been. And we're now early
So
May.
it's more than a year.
It was, about 14 months ago at this point.
Wow.
It's been a long time. I gotta move back to D.C. This is all happening all at once, and it's exciting. I got a studio that I'm going to briefly talk about here for just a second. A 12-minute walk from work. 13 if I just sort of stroll.
Must be nice.
It is nice, but it also I have 4 flights of stairs to go down every morning and 4 flights of stairs to go back up when I head back home. And every time we take a trip out, so it's just around the right amount of time. That's 15 minutes. You get it walking. It's not too long.
Yeah.
To where it's like a hassle to get to work. It is the sweet spot, and I am really enjoying that. Anyway, we
Very
have callers.
nice.
I'm just happy to be back and wanted to talk about that for a minute. We have Tarif calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Good morning, gentlemen. Thanks for taking my call. Free Julian Assange. Okay. We all know that Merkel and Bill Gates don't want to lift their patents on the vaccines, like in Germany or Bill Gates, the money he put in. But you have countries in Africa, like I think it's Nigeria, I know South Africa and some other countries. They want to produce their own vaccines. It will be a good thing where they can learn that hands-on experience producing vaccines such as the coronavirus vaccine. And Paul Kagame out of Rwanda, he want to build Africa's first mRNA vaccine plant in Rwanda, which is a good thing. I'm pretty sure you get the technology from China and Russia. Maybe a Swedish company will send them technology. That would be good. I was watching a Chinese news thing that on YouTube that in the Serrana, Brazil, they had Chinese vaccines that they was taking they was vaccinating some of the people in the province, and they found out that with the Chinese vaccine, it reduced the rates of catching coronavirus, COVID-19. And so they want to expand it, but you have so much a political thing going on right now in Brazil that, is up in the air right now. So you don't know what can happen dealing with that. And I heard something last week, Friday, after I called y'all show, I was talking to Duran. He told me that what's his name?
Alexander McCarthy.
Julian Assange lawyers. Yeah, Julian Assange lawyers wanted to. It's hearing some good things from the Supreme Court over there that they might not see the case. Hopefully, they might not see the appeal. So if they might not see it, that means Julian Assange will be set free. But we can't get our hopes up too high because they might change their mind. They might see the appeal on Julian Assange's extradition. So just keep our fingers crossed and pray that judges don't see that appeal.
Sharif, you know, the most unfortunate thing about Julian Assange is that everything else that happens to him up to this point is just gravy. Meaning the torture has already commenced. Like the pain, the injury, the point of it was to basically torture him in public for X number of years, and they've already accomplished it. And so it's like the release of him is great in the sense that finally he's out. But it's like, yes, he's out after X number of years that have already been packed into the pain of it. I feel you, and I want him out every bit as much as everybody else. And hopefully you're right, where the judges just say, we don't want to hear the case. Because at this point, I mean, there's something exponential about the notion that the guy who told the truth is the one who's being put in prison. That is like, in talking about the condemnation of your world, if that's not it, I don't know what is.
But it's terrible. Tarif, we talk about this pretty regularly. Tarif, we've got 3 other callers. We've got a bunch of calls on the line. I want to move to them. Thank you for the call. Let's go to Michael calling in from Sydney. Michael, you're on the line. What's going on, man?
Yeah, hey guys. Just quickly, I'll touch on what Tyrese said and then pick up on a couple other points. Apparently, the China vaccine, the Sinovac vaccine, I heard on the George Galloway Motherwell talk show, he speaks to Dr. Rajit Brahm. He said apparently Sinovac is the most effective against all the different variants. So that's something you may want to look into. And also, another point on Palestine, what's happening over there. Basically, I agree with the caller. I think Israel is, to all intents and purposes, committing a genocide. They do things like they cut off the water supply into the West Bank. They now control it. They cut off the river flowing in there. They dammed it up. They control the calories. They control everything that goes in and out of the Gaza Strip in the West Bank, right down to the calories that people eat. They don't let them rebuild their infrastructure. They have sewage running in the streets. They only have a certain amount of electricity each day. It's just like it really is just a ghetto, like in Poland, where the Jews revolted against the Nazis. And just on the call that was just on, the guest that was just on Donald Trump, I think if the Republicans and Donald Trump was serious about him running again in any type of election, he would be competing in the midterms, either in the House. I don't know if he has Senate midterms as well, or he compete in the midterms in the Senate, probably against one of the Republican senators who sort of is a never-Trumpist.
Oh, you mean if he ran for Congress? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, he could run for Congress.
Oh, is that? I don't know. Has there ever been a president that ran for Congress afterwards? I don't think so. Yeah, that breaks precedent.
And then he could switch to running for president. If he wins the seat in Congress, he could switch to running for president. Or I don't know if he can run in the Senate, but maybe he can run against Mitch McConnell or an Ever-Trumpist or something like that. Maybe even run in the Congress, maybe in Florida or Texas or something like that.
That would be truly bizarre, and I do not see it happening.
That would be very interesting, though.
Yeah. But interesting comment there, Michael. We got another one. We got Brave calling in from Atlanta. Michael, thank you for the call. Brave, you're on. What's on your mind, Brave?
Hey, what's going on, guys? Pretty interesting show this morning. I agree with a lot of what Tyler was saying. The argument always persists, and it seems to always be the same. With the left-right football game between our team and your team, so we can't see past what your team has done wrong to admit our team's wrongs. But and I agree with a lot of what he was saying concerning what the Democrats are doing, where the Democrats are going with the security state. It's just funny that he omits the part about a lot of the security state initiatives started under the Republicans.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, he ignores that. I mean, it's like I can accept, Tyler going after, because to me, I don't have a dog in this fight, so I don't mind if he It's just the pretending as if none of the other stuff exists. It's that part, and it's like, dude, you can't have it both ways. You can't say I just ignore everything. Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Braith. Finish your comment.
No,
it's only about 30 seconds.
Make 2 points. One point. Wouldn't it be awesome if the Democrats were as dedicated to their base, meaning they would have to support Bernie in the way that the Republicans are afraid of their base and dedicated to their base
1,000%
to a certain extent. And then I don't think there's time for my last point, so I'll leave it there. But good to see you guys in the studio again.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Yeah, it's weird to be back.
Thanks, Brave.
But you guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back with headlines. Back in a moment.
listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America. It is now time for the last hour this morning of the most disruptive show in American news, politics, events, and more from across the disunited states and the surface of our increasingly fragmented globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And it is just about the weirdest thing ever to be back in the studio doing these headlines, getting into it. You just develop a sense of familiarity when it comes to what places you are. You know the feeling. And so it's strange to be making the transition. Anyway, in COVID news, first up, more than 22,300 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, with just under 250 new deaths. Over the past week, there has been an average of 41,057 cases per day. That is a decrease of 30% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 34% of the American public has been fully vaccinated so far, and 46% of residents have received at least one dose as of this morning. The coronavirus has infected more than 32,736,000 people across the United States and killed about 581,300. In India, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is under increasing pressure to impose a national lockdown as the country today experienced 366,000 new cases, one of the worst days this weekend. The country's health ministry reported 3,754 virus-related deaths today after 2 days of above 4,000 deaths per day. And in national political news here in the United States, one of America's largest pipelines, which carries fuel from Texas up to New York, was hit by a ransomware cyber attack on Friday, shutting down its over 5,000 miles of pipeline. Administration officials said they believed the responsible party was a criminal organization, not a state, although according to one of CNN's anonymous sources, the criminal organization is one based in Russia, known as DarkSide. The Biden administration said it is working with the pipeline, the ownership of the pipeline, to prepare for future attacks. House Republicans are set to vote this week on whether or not to replace Liz Cheney as House Republican Conference Chair. That is one of the more the higher profile political infighting scandal things going on in the Republican Party right now. We will be coming back to that a little bit later in this morning. We were also talking about that with Tyler Nixon last hour at about 8:15 a.m. Eastern. Anyway, in international news, Israeli police fired stun grenades and rubber bullets at Palestinians in one of the most sensitive corners in Jerusalem near Al-Aqsa Mosque. Many have been stationed there over the past few days as Israeli police try to get them out of the Al-Aqsa facility. This is part of Ramadan, but it's also of Palestinian land. In Afghanistan, the death toll in the capital soared to 50 following a school bombing, the most recent in a long-term wave of bombings. Al-Shabaab says it is behind a bomb attack in Mogadishu, Somalia. A BBC investigation found that more than 40,000 people in the Philippines are reported to have been employed to run British companies hiring temporary workers in the UK. That's part of a tax avoidance scheme. And in France, a right-wing French newspaper has published a second letter warning that the country is heading toward a civil war. That letter was signed anonymously by many. In tech news, Elon Musk headlined Saturday Night Live this weekend. He was the first host of SNL to open up about having Asperger's syndrome. And the first recipients of a new CRISPR technique that involves editing genes while still inside the body say they are doing well. The patients are genetically blind and are getting the CRISPR treatment in an attempt to cure their illness. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right. I want to go back here for a few seconds, Jamarl. Oh my gosh. Why am I not finding it? Please save me here.
Which one? The story that we were talking to with Tyler?
I was thinking to myself, I'll know exactly what story I want to talk about after I'm done with the headlines.
Sometimes your brain shifts when you're going from one to the next. Yeah, it gets a little weird. Which one did you want to talk about? The one with Tyler or the one that we were talking about beforehand with the gene editing?
Well, we could even. This isn't the
or
one.
the one that I thought was weird was in Paris. The anonymous tip saying there's going to be a civil war.
Yep.
I mean, that could have come from anybody. I mean, like, what
this is the second letter. You remember we were trying to get a guest on about this, and we just weren't finding people who were good on it. They weren't getting responses. Anyway,
what does the letter? Why does the letter believe there's going to be a civil war?
The first letter predicted one, saying that basically if the government didn't respond meaningfully to Islamist violence, to immigration, to various other real and illusory right-wing boogeymen, it's a mixed bag, in my opinion, then the country is going to see a civil war. Now, that sounds threatening, and I think that technically is threatening, but as far as I know, in these letters, they're not saying we're planning on starting a civil war unless the X, Y, and Z changes. They're saying a civil war could be imminent. Yes, this will happen. You'll get this kind of level of civil unrest, and you'll be bringing it upon yourselves, I tell you. So the first letter was sent out. That was not anonymous. There were, retired generals, current members of the armed forces. A lot of people came under investigation as a result of having signed the first letter. This one
I see. That's
is anonymous.
Right.
But this is the second letter predicting a potential civil war. Anyway, we could tie this into what's going on in the United States if we want to. What I wanted to come back to, and it's just worth bringing up. Another use of anonymous sources in headlines was the CNN story about the CNN anonymous sources that are saying that this cyber attack on the pipeline was carried out
in Russia
by Russians.
It was a foreign actor, but in Russia.
Yes,
I love that. Isn't that phenomenal? Like I said, as we're reading, it's like, they didn't use. Oh, there we are. It's that.
Yeah.
An anonymous source, random guy. We don't even know who the guy is. And you would think that they were just burned by this. Not so much.
No, because in a weird way, they can pass it off. But this is what comes with the rash of anonymous sourcing that we increasingly get. And the whole whistleblower / leak thing that defined the Trump presidency, or at least the news media's coverage of it.
Tyler's right about that.
Well, but with a lack of transparency comes a lack of accountability. Right. That's the assumption. If you don't know who's saying something, then you don't.
How can you trust the integrity of it?
Yeah. If what it becomes is effectively a news story laundering facility where they take from anonymous sources something of unknown moral value, and they run it through their editorial team, and what they put out the other side is a trustworthy, verifiable news story, which is effectively what these things are. It's just now coming to me.
It's that.
A little bit of that.
Subprime mortgage.
A little bit of that. Yeah.
Right.
And the leak they get that turns out to be bogus one week drives the news cycle of the next week, and it gets them clicks, it gets them money.
That's right.
It gets them stories that they can prop up with more anonymous sourcing.
And they don't look back.
The one thing that makes the least amount of money are the ads for the retraction sections of the stories, because they don't publicize those nearly as much. They don't put those out in the same way.
Right. Yeah. They don't put the vigor and the force behind the retraction of how we got it wrong. I mean, what did the New York Times do? They just put the thing at the bottom and say, our bad. This story was wrong. Yeah. You would think they would have learned, but no. I think the reason they don't learn is because there's a consequence. There's nothing, like when they got weapons of mass destruction wrong, there was no consequence for that. I mean, that was a monstrous thing to get wrong. But again, everybody walked away from that with no issue. Nobody lost their jobs, is not that I'm aware of. I mean, even from the standpoint of the Giuliani thing, did anybody really get in trouble for that? Did anybody lose their job? No. They didn't.
What are they going to say? Blame our anonymous sourcing? Right. Our anonymous source really screwed us on this one. It's like the fourth time this week.
Well, the problem is the New York Times said they confirmed it independently.
That's what they said.
How?
And that's the fundamental question. How do you know that you confirmed it independently?
Yeah. I mean, like, if the source is really anonymous, let's say they found Bob, and Bob is anonymous. All right. How does the Washington Post or the New York Times know who the Washington Post has? Unless they actually do know.
Clearly Bob. But you just said...
It's like, who else are they going to use, right?
My mind broke when you said that, because I'm like, here's Bob. He's anonymous.
Right.
Meet our anonymous named man, Bob.
Well, it's anonymous to us. I mean, to everybody else.
Of course. No, I
we
understand.
know who he is, yeah.
I get
but
it.
It's just the weirdest thing. It's like, we confirmed this independently. How? How? Nobody asked that question of like, how do you confirm a story independently when the guy is supposed to be anonymous? This is, again, Dick Cheney. He's saying, hey, I'm giving you guys a tip. And then Dick Cheney going out saying, hey, well, the Washington Post or the New York Times said this. He was the guy that gave the anonymous tip. I mean, it's basically you guys are being played. And I'm to the point where I don't even think they're being played. Like, I always ask the question, are they lying or are they incompetent? And I am moving to the point of, on some level, incompetence. Like, there was one of the reporters that said, you would never expect your government to lie to you. And you're like, what are you talking about? Like, right here, Michelle, what is her name? Konsky. She is writer, host, storyteller, believer in real democracy. I cover the White House, State Department, the world news. Now I make things that I watch. Now, maybe this is one of those things where if you're in government, you are in it, so you believe it, if that makes sense. It's like, if I'm going to participate in this game of sorts, then I'm going to believe in the game so fervently that reality itself is just going to be defined by the game space itself. There's nothing beyond the game. And so she says, as an American journalist, you never expect, one, your government to lie to you repeatedly, two, your government to hide information the public has right to know, and three, your government not to spy on your communications. Trump's un-American regime did all of these things. No one should accept this. Is she insane?
Whichever country she lives in.
America!
I would really love to visit that country because it sounds good. It sounds like innocent.
America! I can't believe she's saying this. I mean, think about what Bush did. Like the mass surveillance, the lying about the Iraq. Think about what Obama did. The lying about Syria. There are no boots on the ground. There are no boots on the ground. I mean, like, these are monstrous lies. I mean, we're talking about things that are getting people killed to the hundreds of thousands. I mean, think of Yemen, for example, where you had the situation where Obama sits in a room, based on the New York Times, sits in a room and makes a decision to allow the Yemen war, knowing it's going to be a bloody fest, but he wants to get his other thing through. Or the kill list. I mean, think of what we're talking about, and they accept it. Why do you accept the kill list? Your president just says, that guy. And then Soleimani, when Trump does it, well, at that point, Obama has already set the precedent of it. But nobody cared when Obama was killing people because it's Obama. He plays basketball and he croons jazz. And, so that makes it okay. Not to mention he's black. And when black people kill people with drones, it's somehow different than white people killing people with drones. It's very bizarre. But her government lies to her constantly. And she just says, well, you never expect that. Why not? Why wouldn't you expect your government to lie? Like, if your government is in a position of authority, and your government is in a position of out, and your government has all of this responsibility to do X and Y, what happens when their responsibility or their ability to meet those things don't line up to it? Meaning, what happens when Joe Biden has a situation about immigration where he has these ideological beliefs about immigrants and then all of a sudden the border becomes a mess because on some level he said he incentivizes more kids to come unaccompanied and in the other case takes off certain restraints that Trump had in? Well, your ideology didn't necessarily line up to, the reality of things. So what do? Do you tell the truth about how bad things are? Or do you say, hey, you guys can see that facility when we finish with that facility? It's the latter. And maybe that's not necessarily a lie in the proper sense. But I guess my point is your government lies to you constantly. And it's not just the Trump administration. It's the Obama administration. It's the Bush administration. It's Clinton. Like, the idea that she doesn't know that is disturbing to me. Like, that, I'm just shocked by that. And maybe I shouldn't be shocked by that. I always ask, are you lying or incompetent? And apparently the answer is both.
That's not what they taught them in school, though. It's a lot more convenient when you send kids to, like, journalism school, the big brick and mortar establishment. The lesson plan is so much simpler when they effectively have to just copy each other's work.
Stenographers.
If you don't have to actually teach them, if you don't have to teach them how to do the bread and butter of research, independent corroboration, checking multiple angles from different sources, that whole set of techniques or whatever, but you instead have to do the even more impossible, which is teaching them as a group to not think like a group. I don't see how you get anywhere with that. And we're living with this, we're living in the consequence of that, this vast miasma of interpersonal contact between the fourth estate of government, between the journalistic press, between the intelligence community, between the government here in Washington, D.C., down at the Capitol building, deliberating behind the walls of Congress over Wall Street. Just a quick trip up the eastern seaboard. See, I went on a cross-country trip recently, Jamarl. I'm thinking geographically. You got all this stuff and all these connections and this sort of perfectly permeable set of layers of operation where if you're failing to get a job in one domain, you can flip over to the other domain with a few contacts. It's all kind of coming with the territory. Anyway, we're living in that. We're living in that miasma of spaces. The journalistic class is far more convenient for them if they retain their connections in Congress. And so they just copy each other's work. That's what we get. That's where we are. We need to close this out, though. Unfortunate. It is unfortunate. We need to close this out. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We are coming back with Caleb Maupin on the other side of the short break. Be right back with Caleb.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune in to Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We are also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make the show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. Pet peeve. Elizabeth Warren, the woman who was taken down by billions of snake emojis. Elizabeth Warren is a pet peeve for me. She's a trigger point for me. It's amazing that a woman could run in a race, scream to high heaven that she is a progressive, and then rips off basically everything from the other guy that ran in 2016 that has every right to run in 2020. And then after losing, because she supports a Medicare plan that wasn't a Medicare plan, and snake emojis, of course, she then refuses to back Sanders. Right here. Asked in an interview why she initially chose not to endorse any candidate after she withdrew, Warren sighed and gave an uncharacteristically slow, halting answer. There were a few more states to vote, she said. I knew I wanted to wait until there was one person in the race and to get 100% behind that person. So let me get this straight. You're supposedly a lefty. You're supposedly progressive. You basically rip off everything that's Sanders with the not really Sanders. And yet, at the end of that process, in fact, Warren started off that process being entirely against super PACs. I am against super PACs. My name is Elizabeth Warren. And then takes $14 million in a super PAC after that, saying that the penises of the men involved allowed this to be okay because she's the only one that, meaning if the guys are going to do it, the women are going to do it. And it's like, but Sanders didn't have a super PAC, so what are you talking about? You've just repudiated everything that you've believed in, and not just everything that you've believed in, everything that those people supported, in order for you to stay in the race just enough time to put a knife in Sanders. Yes, I am burned up about this because there are a lot of people that voted for Warren that believed they were getting Sanders and were conned. There's a question that come up about why did Sanders lose in this race? And this has to do with her book called Persist that is out now if you want to buy it. To have a conversation about Warren in the last race in the primary, we're joined with Caleb Maupin. Caleb Maupin is a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His new book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of changing U.S. political discourse and geopolitical stage. Caleb, thank you for joining us, man. I appreciate you joining us on this.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So, outside of the snake emojis, why did Warren lose? Because she doesn't seem to know.
Well, look, Elizabeth Warren, her whole background, her rise to prominence was in the Obama administration. She was a regulator. She was seen as somebody who kind of rode the wave of kind of anti-corporate and anti-big bank sentiments that came after the financial crisis. But yet, as she rose to prominence, we also learned that she's very much a person who has a record of, activities that make her less likable the more you get to know her. There's the infamous Pocahontas label given to her by Donald Trump, that she apparently went to Harvard on the basis of being Native American, despite the fact that, that she, clearly doesn't appear to have very strong Native American credentials. You can talk about the fact that, even though she talks a very, very progressive game when it comes to corporations, that she seems a little bit, kind of, populist in that sense. She does have a record, you talk about selling out the Sanders campaign, you talk about foreign policy. She is a very, very vehement supporter of Israel and very, very hostile to anyone who is at all critical of Israel. You could talk about some of the statements she's made about wars around the world, and that, she may have gotten up at the Democratic National Convention in 2012 and screamed that corporations are not people. But at the end of the day, she's not really associated with a very progressive agenda. Like you said, when it came to health care, when it came to Bernie Sanders, she may have echoed some of Bernie Sanders' rhetoric, but in terms of actually what she advocates, she's very much Hillary Clinton light.
Not just Hillary Clinton light. I mean, Clinton and Warren had a secret deal. I mean, it was many of the women. I think it was back in 2013 that they signed. So when Sanders came to ask her to run, well, the deal was already in that she was going to back Hillary Clinton. They even have reporting talking about Warren, or Clinton was worried because they thought that Warren was going to want more out of her because of it. I mean, the relationship between Warren and Clinton go back like 2013, and there's no reason to believe that their relationship ended in 2020. Now, that's the catch for me. I don't believe for a moment their relationship ended. I mean, if you think of Bill Clinton was famous for basically saying, don't let Bernie Sanders take the party. And you had a Democratic Party that basically collapsed around Joe Biden, and you had Warren staying in the race using $14 million from a super PAC just long enough to make sure that the knife was put in Sanders, meaning she had to basically repudiate everything that she backed up just for that moment, just for her to do that. And so when I look at this, I think to myself, if all the other Democrats were already on board, if you had a situation where she already had a relationship with Clinton, is it possible that the fix was in? And that's the way I look at the primary. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, do you think that's too conspiratorial, or no, the Democrats have their own machinations and this was one of them? What are your thoughts?
I think she's very much associated with the mainstream of the Democratic Party. And it's funny because if you look at her career, right, I mean, she did rise to prominence on kind of economic issues and this kind of anti-corporate populism that followed the 2008 financial meltdown. But yet the way that she has, maneuvered since then, she seems to be doing kind of the opposite of that and playing into this identity politics thing. Whether it's, and many people question the claim that she has made about, she was fired for being pregnant and, that's like this feminist thing. And many people have looked into the details and said that her story doesn't line up there. Her claim about being Native American, I mean, that whole thing is quite embarrassing. And if she would stick to an anti-corporate script, I think she might maintain an appeal, but she can't do that, right? I mean, that's not how the Hillary Clinton wing of the Democratic Party works. You got to go with this identity politics. You got to go with this, this feminism and this narrative about who's more oppressed and such. And even in her terms of her own career, I mean, she became who she is because of economic issues.
Yes, 100%. I'm going to pivot here pretty radically, Caleb. Talking about Victory Day, the sort of Soviet-Russian holiday, which happened just yesterday,
76th anniversary.
May 9th, exactly, the 76th anniversary, basically, of the winning of World War II. I know you're based in New York, but how do you see this being covered? How do you think it's been received in Russia? And just generally, I'm curious, your comments on America's view of Soviet involvement in World War II in general. Caleb.
Well, it's a huge moment of national pride for Russia. I mean, the fact that they were so key in one of the most important fights of the 20th century. I mean, the defeat of the Nazis. I would say the biggest, most important moment of the 20th century was the Second World War, when the Nazis were defeated. The Soviet Union lost 27 million people, but they took Berlin. They really turned the war around with the Battle of Stalingrad, and the whole world was really cheering for the Soviet Union. And watching them, do the impossible as they just, rolled back the Nazi invasion and ultimately, turned the tide of the war. It's a great moment of pride, and the parade that happens in Russia and the statements we heard from the Russian president. And it's really sad that there has been such an effort to kind of rewrite the historical narrative. And I got to call out directly, there's a professor at Yale. He's the head of the Russian Studies Department at Yale, Timothy Snyder. And he has written an entire book called Bloodlands, which is an attempt to try and equate the Soviet Union with Nazi Germany in World War II. And there is this whole effort to try and belittle one of the most heroic and the most heroic and self-sacrificing anti-fascist force in history, the Soviet Union, and try to equate them with the Nazis. Putin directly, referenced that dangerous historical revisionism in his remarks, and how there is this whole effort to roll back the Communist International had been building an anti-fascist united front around the world, since long before the Western powers were talking that way. They were building anti-fascist coalitions, the League Against War and Fascism, it convened in the early 30s. You can talk about the communists who went to Spain to fight against Franco. You could talk about, about the Battle of Cable Street in London, where you had, communists mobilizing against the pro-Hitler Oswald Mosley when he was marching through the streets of Britain. And all over the world, communists that were aligned with the Soviet Union were building anti-fascist coalitions, raising the alarm about the fascist danger. And yet that all gets kind of, glossed over, and we very much have this narrative in the United States that somehow the Soviet Union, because there was a temporary non-aggression pact in 1939, because of that means the Soviet Union and the Nazis were allies or best friends or something, which is just ridiculous.
Yeah, that's nonsense.
It's really horrifying to see how the whole history of the Second World War has been rewritten in order to feed this anti-Russian narrative.
Well, Stalin wanted to make some connection with the U.S. Not the U.S., I'm sorry, with the West, but they weren't interested. In Stephen Kopkin's book on Stalin, it even gets, Stephen Kopkin, that's his name. It even gets into this notion that Stalin paying attention to the fascists that were in Germany. The number of people that died in that war, especially from the standpoint of the Soviet side, was astonishing. And if you're looking at the numbers, just in the number of deaths in comparison to either the Americans or Brits, it doesn't come close. There's no comparison. The overwhelming majority of the army was destroyed on the Soviet side with Soviet blood. From your standpoint, when you're looking at this, how do we lose the peace? Meaning at the end of that war, there was this huge upswell of this notion that this is a war to end the wars, if that makes sense. But that wasn't true. Why not?
Well, as the war was ending, we had the death of Roosevelt, and, Truman became president of the United States. And even before the war had fully ended, you see the USA transitioning toward the Cold War mindset. And you saw, eventually the recruitment of a lot of former, Nazi intelligence officers that were recruited and, by the CIA and
British paperclip
organization. Yeah, and there was a whole kind of effort by the United States to suddenly transition away from fighting fascism to aligning with a lot of fascist forces that were anti-communist, and in Europe and other places. And in South Korea, the U.S. and South Korea, aligned itself with a lot of former Japanese collaborators. Park Chung-hee, who became the military dictator of South Korea, who was backed by the United States, he had been a former Japanese collaborator in South Korea. And all over the world, you had the United States. Suddenly it was okay if you were a fascist as long as you were anti-communist. That became the policy of the early Cold War in the United States. And based on that, that moment of optimism that you saw kind of faded away into a dangerous, moment with the rise of the Cold War. In the Soviet Union, they formed the World Federation of Democratic Youth and started having world festivals of youth and students to bring together the anti-fascist, anti-imperialist youth from around the world. I've actually been to 2 of those festivals. They're amazing global gatherings of anti-fascist and anti-imperialist youth from around the world. They still have, that tradition started at the end of the Second World War. You had the formation of the Women's International Democratic Federation and the World Federation of Trade Unions, and you had the Soviet Union really trying to set up a situation where we could make sure there would never be something like World War II again. And I mean, we haven't had another world war, thank goodness. I mean, we had the Cold War and the many conflicts that have happened, but thank goodness that there's never yet again been another world war. But at the same time, the warmongering, militaristic policies of the United States have certainly not helped in that regard.
No, they haven't helped at all. And so, look, thank you for that, because we wanted to have this conversation about Victory Day and situation around that. Caleb, is it possible for you to stay with us for another 15?
Of course.
Excellent. So we're going to bring you back. Caleb Maupin is a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His new book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of a changing U.S. political discourse on the geopolitical stage. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my indispensable co-host, Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. We're joined with Caleb Maupin. He's a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His new book, Kamala Harris and Future of America, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of changing U.S. political discourse and the geopolitical stage. Again, Caleb, thank you for joining us. So, Caleb, I want to get into either one or 2 things, either Bloodlands or into this idea of how did it, I don't want to say all come apart. I was watching, or I was reading the last book, and this was a few months ago, Trotsky's basically explanation of what happened, like how did it go wrong? Like all of these grand ideas coming from, the book, what is it, the 10 days or that shook the world or something to that effect. I forget the exact name of the book. I could see the cover of the book. But it goes into this kind of euphoria or sorts, and then it gets into this kind of cratering with Stalin. What happened? How did it go wrong in regards to, was it just the competition of the warring powers where they were just assuming that they were going to be invaded? Was it this dedication to military because of looking across at the fascists? What was the thing that created the friction where that didn't necessarily go in the way that they planned on it going?
Sorry, I'm not exactly quite clear what you're asking.
So what I'm asking is, so basically at the point where, let's go to a different one, Bloodlands. Let's talk about Bloodlands. I've heard of that book. I think I've even started reading part of that book. What is the thing, or what is the basic detail of that book that causes problems? Because you mentioned that the Putin basically named the book by name when he was having a conversation about the book. You said it makes this notion as if the Nazis and basically the communists basically fighting the Nazis were of equal terms. How did it basically make that argument? And what is basically the flaw? And clearly I already know the flaw in the argument, but what's the flaw in the argument if somebody is reading that book and they're taken by the book?
Well, if you want to read a thorough refutation of many points in that book to show that it is just scholarly, it's poor scholarship, it's inaccurate, I would recommend Dr. Grover Furr of he's a professor in New Jersey, and he wrote a book called Blood Lies, where he actually takes the book apart point by point. He takes apart Timothy Snyder's book, and he shows that there's poor scholarship, there's inaccuracy, and that it tries to present this narrative of the Second World War where the Soviets are guilty of crimes that are just as bad as the crimes of the Nazis, and it's not accurate. One of the most glaring lies that we frequently hear is that you'll hear that there was a joint invasion of Poland, that when the Nazis invaded Poland, they invaded it in coordination with the Soviet Union. That's not true. The Nazis invaded the government of Poland. They invaded Poland. The government of Poland collapsed and went into exile. And the Soviets, in response to that, moved their forces up to the line, right? The 1939 pact, they drew a line across Europe. The Nazis said, we'll keep our forces on this side. The Soviets said, we'll keep our forces on this side. The Soviets saw Hitler invade Poland, overthrow the government, and in response to that, they anticipated an incoming Nazi invasion, so they moved their forces right up to the line. The government in exile, the Polish government in exile, never declared war against the Soviet Union and never condemned the Soviet Union for doing that. At the time that it happened, no one considered that to be a joint invasion or the Soviets were collaborating with the Nazis in Poland. No one considered that to be what happened. It was simply the Nazis invaded Poland, the government collapsed, and the Soviets, anticipating that the Nazis would probably break the pact, moved their forces right up to the line. But yet we're repeatedly told that, it was a joint invasion. It was not a joint invasion. It was simply the Soviet Union strategically, moving its forces right up to the line in anticipation of Hitler, starting the war by invading Poland. And there are other examples of this where Timothy Snyder, he goes out of his way to kind of push a narrative that makes the Soviets seem like they're the moral equivalent of the Nazis. Grover Furr, he's a professor at Montclair State University, and he's written this book, Blood Lies, dissecting Timothy Snyder's book. And one of the things that he refutes, Timothy Snyder will, makes claims about, he says Soviet troops frequently raped Ukrainian women. But then the source that he uses actually has the opposite. The source that he uses says, no, there was one Soviet soldier who did, and he was put on trial for it and punished and sent to a prison camp for doing it. That says the exact opposite of what he claimed, and that there throughout the book, you see him cite sources from the Soviet archives that say the opposite of what he says they said in order to feed this narrative. This isn't just some random guy. This is the head of the Russian Studies Department at Yale. This is one of the prominent voices, and he was kind of, he was made into kind of one of the leading, experts on tyranny and such during the early years of Trump, and it's rather disturbing to see this man who is an anti-Russian fanatic who, is basically, Bloodlands, the book, it reads almost like an apology for the Nazis. It's like, well, sure, the Nazis were bad, but they weren't as bad as those Russians and those communists, and that this is being promoted in the mainstream. It's really, really disturbing that such stuff is promoted, and that narrative is out there. I don't believe Putin directly mentioned the book, but he referred to that narrative of equating the Soviet Union in World War II with the Nazis, the people who liberated the concentration camps with the people who built the concentration camps. It's just something, it's a narrative that just doesn't match reality, but yet it is widely, widely promoted.
Well, okay, so two different directions, actually. I want to go here with you, Caleb. First of all, thank you again for joining us. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact is the name of the pact that you were referring to, although I should use the word pact in quotes, because from the way you're talking about it, you're describing it as not being a sort of predetermined agreement to split Poland between the Soviets and the Nazis, but instead a sort of de facto political line, border, drawn between the territories the Nazis took over in Poland and the Russians sort of just moving their troops up to hug that line closely in anticipation of a potential war. Just briefly and broadly, is that right? And then the second question that I want to throw to you, this isn't suggesting Soviet involvement or responsibility to the Germans or anything like that, but the idea that the Germans started the Soviet Union, that Kaiser Wilhelm II moved Lenin from Switzerland, the Russian revolutionary, during World War I, basically gave him rite of passage, gave him his own train to travel to the Soviet Union, what would soon become the Soviet Union, at his hands. Just any comments on that, Caleb? That's just one of the more interesting episodes in history.
Sure. Well, as far as the first thing, I mean, the Soviet Union had gone to all of the major powers. You know, they'd gone to Britain, they'd gone to the United States, and they even temporarily had an alliance with France, and they wanted to form, you know, a non-aggression pact with all the major Western powers to fight, you know, to block the Nazis. The French had a temporary agreement with the Soviet Union, and then they broke it. The USA turned the Soviet Union down. Britain turned the Soviet Union down. So in 1939, as the world was heading toward World War II very quickly, the Soviet Union realized it needed to buy time. It was anticipating, you know, the war breaking out, and so they signed a non-aggression pact with the Nazis, and it bought them time and probably saved a lot of lives and gave them time to prepare the war effort. And the Pact of 39 drew a line down the center of Europe and basically said, you know, the Soviets, we will keep our military on this side of the line as long as the Nazis keep their forces on this side of the line. And that's what it was. It was an agreement that the Soviet Union would not cross one line and the Nazis would not cross another. And eventually the Nazis did cross that line, and the Nazis broke the pact. And then you had World War II. And there's a great book called The Soviets Expected It by Anna Louise Strong, you know, and she talks in great detail about how the Soviets basically anticipated the breaking of that pact, and it was something they were forced to do in order to buy time. That's as far as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939. But as far as the first thing you mentioned, that's kind of interesting that, yes, that is true, that that the Bolsheviks, you know, Lenin was in exile. He was in Switzerland, and it was German intelligence, in particular Alexander Parvus, who was a socialist who had kind of been an ally of the Bolsheviks, but then kind of turned against them and become an elected official in Germany from the Social Democratic Party and supported World War I and was basically a German intelligence officer. And as the war was going on, Alexander Parvus, the leader of German intelligence in World War I, determined that the Bolsheviks, if they were to go back to Russia because they were anti-war and because they wanted to break up the Russian Empire and grant self-determination to the various nationalities throughout the region, that it might be useful to smuggle Lenin back to the Soviet Union, or back to Russia, and the rest is history. I mean, that decision by the German intelligence officer really made history, and it's kind of hilarious because the Nazis, they always push this conspiracy theory that's been widely debunked, this claim that somehow the Russian Revolution was a conspiracy by Jewish people in New York or Wall Street bankers, and that's ridiculous. But why did the Nazis always push that? Because it is proven that there was German support for Lenin and the Bolshevik Revolution.
They had to clean their hands, sort of.
Yeah.
I can see that.
So
okay, that's very interesting, Caleb. Always, I know that I can ask you these questions, and you will have a meaningful and great response. I want to talk about George F. Kennan for just a second here, which is admittedly a little bit far afield, but he is the man in the United States who writes the long telegram, and then this article, I believe, attributed to X, which it later comes out as George F. Kennan, giving a couple of different modifications, a couple responses from the United States to the rise of the Soviet Union. And it's one guy who has influence in various presidential administrations. Can you just talk for a minute about what George F. Kennan said in the long telegram? How accurate or inaccurate some of his comments were, in your opinion, and how did this affect modern U.S. politics? I hope I'm not hitting you with too much here, Caleb, especially after I just talked you up. We didn't notify you of this story in advance, but in 2 minutes, exactly, like Jamarl was saying, in 2 minutes, what are your thoughts, Caleb?
Well, look, the way the Soviet Union was viewed by the United States, it was always viewed with hostility. And, the FBI itself originated in response to fear of the Soviet Union. After the Soviet Union emerged, there was this, in 1919, there was this, congressional librarian. I mean, he was a librarian who worked at the Library of Congress. His name was J. Edgar Hoover. But, barely anybody knew anything about communism, and he was in Washington, D.C., and he started giving these fiery lectures about how scary the communists were. And based on that, they gave him his own wing of the Department of Justice, the Bureau of Investigation. It became the FBI in response to basically just fear of communism.
Are you serious? Is that how... Are you serious? I did not know that. So J. Edgar Hoover got started. He was Say that again. I'm sorry.
A librarian?
Phenomenal. He started off as a librarian?
Yeah, he was a congressional librarian who lived with his mother and was kind of socially awkward. And when the Russian Revolution happened, in the aftermath of the Russian Revolution, he gave lectures to members of Congress and others about what communism was and why communism was very, very scary. And based on those lectures and based on his becoming the big expert on the danger of communism, the Justice Department created a wing called the Bureau of Investigation, the BOI, which eventually became the FBI. That's where the FBI came from.
24 years old, and the bit about the mother I've heard about before, but at 24 years old, he became the head of the Bureau of Investigation. Again, not the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Their new General Intelligence Division, also known as the Radical Division, responding to, threat of radicalism politically at home. And then, like you're saying, rose to the head of the Bureau of Investigation, and then was involved in the founding of the FBI, of course, and a pivotal player there for many years. Caleb, we got to bring you back on at some other time to talk about this more, and just in general, understanding that era of history. We actually don't do enough to get into it because that is pivotal. The 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the sort of fulcrum of the 20th century as the major power players, not just in the United States, but literally globally. Some are receding. The United States is advancing to the forefront. A lot of the ideas that still govern Washington were set in place during that period. We got to come back to you some other time to get back into the conversation. Anyway, we're out of time here. Caleb, thank you for joining us this morning.
Sure thing. Thank you.
For those listening, that was Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His new book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of changing U.S. political discourse and the geopolitical stage. And you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into a break. We'll be back in a minute taking your calls, 202-521-1320. Be right back.
Fault Lines. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We are back in our rap segment, 202-521-1320. Again, that's 202-521-1320. Quick heads up, Jamarl and I are back in our new studio, our radio studio in Washington, D.C., which is cool, although it's a little bit disorienting. We have been, I don't know if you've heard, but we've been in a pandemic for a little bit over a year now. And for most of that pandemic, if you were a city dweller, then at some point your entire life got inverted, and the vast majority of your time you would have had to spend inside or at least away from other people, other denizens of that city. So we have been in that mode for a long time. We are now back in the studio having a little bit of fun, but it is our first day, and all of the cables in my mind that should be set up to handle this experience and this experience, and that I would be used to this pretty soon after I get back into it, but it's going to take a little bit of time. Everything feels wrong on this weird, deep, subtle level. Anyway, Jamarl, 202-521-1320. It is great to see you back in the studio here.
Same here. Excellent. Yeah, it's weird, but I feel like it's kicking back in. It's it's not like, you know what it is? It's not like playing chess. Like if you stop for a very long time and you just kind of assume that those powers are there, you will be disabused that those powers are there. They're not cosmic to require skill. This feels a little different. It only feels like it's getting back into it, and maybe just because of political misfits and everything else. And I was here with Bob for a while over a period of time, so it may be that, but it does feel like getting back into the hang of it.
It's the change of setting.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
Drastic.
I think you're more of a dog person than a cat person. Am I right in that?
Yes. Absolutely.
So with cats, I love both dogs and cats. But I grew up.
Cats. My mom hated cats. She was terrified of cats.
I grew up with cats more, but I love dogs too. Dogs are great, and I like cats quite a bit as well. Anyway, if you move with a cat, you will know a lot of the cat. Like if you think about its peripheral nervous system, it has built out a map of its neighborhood, whether it's a house or if it's an outdoor cat, which hopefully you can make happen in some way. it's built out a complete map of its neighborhood. And when it is moving around, if you have to take that cat from a place where it has an internal map, a sort of idea of the neighborhood, and move it somewhere else, that cat goes through a radical, sense of
Discombobulated.
Yeah, it set of emotions, neural reinterfacing.
Really?
It goes through a lot of stuff because it's sort of built out a second brain using the environment.
Yeah.
It has its memories of the place, and it's able to use this sort of route network thing that it has developed. Anyway, it's super integral to the cat, and that is how I feel being ripped up and taken and put into a completely different situation back here in Washington, D.C.
No, I feel more mutable in this, where it's like, all right, I'm here, I'm in my studio, okay, I'm here in the other studio. Like I don't feel, it feels surreal, but it felt that way when I first got here and making the drive here. But it was like a muscle memory that started here back in. No, I'm a better person in studio, I think.
So 202-521-1320. But Jamarl, how do you get here? What's your drive like?
So I get in the car, drive to the train, get on the train, and then get here. But the beauty of it is the train ride is like 40 minutes. So I get to sit there and do my work on the way to the train. So if there's videos or anything else, I use my cell phone, cut it with my computer. I forgot how long that ride was and how much time that gives you to read, to catch up on story, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Like
that is.
I mean, because it's not dead time. Like if you're just driving, it's dead time. You can't do anything else but drive. When you're on the train, somebody else is doing that. You're sitting there for like 40 minutes and like, oh, I want to cut this clip. Oh, I like this story for today. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to do that. When we used to do the story for Political Misfits and everything else, you used to sit there and basically get the stories out on the train, and then you get there and complain about what you want to talk about and everything else. So it's a little bit like that, but it's, I don't know, it's different. Because it's so early in the morning. It's like 5 o'clock. There's nobody in the parking garage. It's like, yes, I get to pick up the litter. Yeah, it's different. It's different, but it's the same in a weird way. It's very strange.
Yeah, yeah.
But no, it's, it's a muscle memory. Get back into it. It's just getting here a little bit earlier. But no, all things being good. How was your trip here? I mean, whether people realize it or not, you had to basically transport yourself all across country. And you didn't have a teleporter. You didn't have a Hyperloop. Didn't have a flying car.
Not that I know about.
You had to use the old style.
Yeah, theoretically.
Which is the current style.
I got teleported and then they like rewrote my memory or something. But as far as I remember, my right hand to whatever God there may be up there, I had a pretty good road trip with my brother.
Yeah.
That's
basically what it was.
We left Sioux Falls, South Dakota on Thursday after the show was over. I took Friday off, as some of the people listening to the show may have noticed, and we drove all day Friday, most of the day Saturday, got in Saturday evening, had that day to pack, had Sunday, to unpack, had yesterday, Sunday, we went to IKEA.
Yeah.
We bought
How does it feel being back in D.C.?
It is weird. But
because you've been gone the entire time.
I have been, but I also love DC's architecture.
Yeah.
And if you're able to walk around the city, whether you're walking around the monuments or whether you're just walking around the fairly short streets where you have these wide boulevards in DC that I don't think any building can go above, 12 floors, something like that?
Yeah, it can't go above the monument.
Exactly. And yeah, so they're all set at a fairly, and some are quite a bit shorter than that. What'd you say?
It's like a measuring contest. I don't know if I can sit on radio, but
yes.
It's like we can only go this high. And, it's like this is ours and we're going to be the ones with the, by law.
Well, New York City is cool because in New York City, for instance, you have skyscrapers, which are just like these incredible behemoths of buildings.
Insanely high.
But in Washington, D.C., it's a little bit more scaled down.
Yeah.
And, whether it's the brick, or the marble, or the lawns on the long Washington Monument lawnway, it's pretty to walk around. And we're also we brought our bikes. This was we had to rent this 12-foot box truck because we had to bring bikes and a couple of computers and monitors and boxes and that kind of thing. But we brought our bikes, and DC is a great city for riding a bike around.
Yeah,
definitely try that out if you for some reason live here but haven't ridden a bike yet.
That is very, very cool, man. I'm glad you're back, and I'm glad you enjoy being back, and I'm glad your bro was able to ride with you.
He was. My brother in a last-minute moved in with me in D.C., and so I would have been a little bit lonely just renting this studio apartment by myself. He made it in there, and we're going to make it do on like 400 square feet, the two of us, we're planning our bunk bed now. I'm not planning on dating for years. I just don't see how that's possibly going to happen. But I know I love my brother, and it should be a good trip.
No, you can pull that off. My wife and I, when we were in, I think it was Barcelona, it was like our money was tight when we were traveling because it was like we were doing this thing of like getting the paycheck and then paying for something. So you had to stay where you were for like a week or 2 weeks in order for you to get to the next paycheck, and then you go that way. And so by the time we booked the ticket to, I think it was Barcelona, they only had one hotel left. It was one room, and I still had to do the move, like my videos and everything else. And so it was like us together for 2 weeks in this tiny, tiny room, just one room. And it's like, this ain't gonna work. We're gonna kill each other. We're gonna kill each other. And I think that was the most difficult part of the trip. Like, it's not, look, I love my wife. And you've realized how much you love your wife when you can stay in one room for 2 weeks.
Yes, that's the trick. Yeah.
Right, that's the trick, right? Because it's like the road trip is the thing that's the test. It's like, if I could go on a road trip with this woman and we don't kill each other, then it's met, it's cosmic. And so it's like, we stayed, we made it. Yes, aggravating, getting on each other's nerves, developed a smoking habit from Lisbon.
I remember talking to you about that.
Smoking habit from that.
Yep.
I've gotten rid of that smoking habit. I don't think I was ever addicted to it. But no, man, it's that's when you know it's love. When you can just stay there with the other person. It's like, I can strangle them in their sleep and nobody would know.
And I won't.
And I won't.
I'm going to hold back. Yeah.
And I won't. It's love.
No, that's why we're getting the bunk bed. It's a little bit harder to strangle each other. It's not like you're on the same level. You're like, I would have to climb up the stairs, or he would have to climb down the stairs.
He'll hear me coming up.
Exactly. And so you've got some degree of mutually assured knowledge there, mutually assured lack of destruction.
That reminds me, that another art episode. So my wife, she has a tendency, when I fall asleep on the couch, I don't sleep well. Like, I think I didn't go to bed at all last night, or when I went to bed, I think it was like 4 o'clock. Which means I didn't sleep at all.
Given that, you seem like you're doing fine. But
well, I'm not off. Like, my thing is, like, I can go for a couple of days. I'm good for a couple of days. Yeah. After a couple of days, it gets a little dicey. I started not off, and I started to get these micro sleeps. But I would fall asleep on the couch, and she would turn on Star Trek and leave. Now, what she knows is that what she believes is if Star Trek is on, he'll stay asleep. And if she cuts the TV off, I wake up and like, hey, what's on? Cut the TV off.
Yep.
And so her trick is cut the TV. So I would wake up, and I would wake up to like different episodes of Star Trek.
The iceberg goes so much deeper, Jamarl. You watch Star Trek consciously, and I knew you were a Star Trek fan, but you sleep to it. It goes.
She cuts it on.
It is buried in the sediment of your imagination. You are knee deep in this.
Dreaming it.
Exactly.
I woke up with this awesome episode, and I forgot how good some of those episodes were, where these guys are at war, but it's like the government collapse. It's a colony. And so in order for them to come up with peace terms, they came up with a deal where one side or both sides will put in these things in their chests. So if they get too close to the territory, it'll go off.
Oh, man.
Now, their reasoning is like, this is to keep the peace. This is to keep the thing. And Picard was like, I don't care whatever they call it. This stuff is ridiculous. Because in his head, it's like, this is the nonsense. It's a critique on us.
Maybe.
Like, it definitely is. Like Picard is so ashamed of humanity. It's hard to get across. And on the first episode where Q is like ribbing him, and he is basically like, humanity is being condemned. And he's like, that's not us anymore. That's not us anymore.
Yeah.
Picard is like the critique of humanity, going forward. But no, it's this weird critique of us. And it's like, from our standpoint, we were like, okay, we do that. We get that. Like, we get it on a gut level, right? And it's like, well, there's a logic to that, even though it's not a good logic. They basically, the governments fell, and they came up with a way to keep themselves from killing each other. And the way they kept themselves from killing each other was basically, okay, equal measure.
And you keep to the border.
Yeah.
And you do not play baseball within like a mile of that border, because if the ball goes over, you're never going to see that thing again. No, exactly. I mean, maybe this is one of those instances. I would have to see the episode.
You'd have to see the episode.
I'd have to see the episode to get my response on what exactly they're satirizing or ridiculing or just making light of in America. Because that's where Star Trek is fundamentally that kind of mirror-like show.
Yeah.
Well, but we watch it as a representation. We ask the questions. It asks us questions. Yeah. And I'm very familiar with that. Anyway, we need to close today's show out. Great day to be back in the studio in Washington, D.C. I want to thank all of our callers, all of our guests. I want to thank Jamarl Thomas. sitting right here with me. I want to thank engineer Andre over in our studio. I will even thank Ryan, I believe that is, our other engineer. Hey, what's up, Ryan? Anyway, we've got to close today's show out. You're listening to Fault Lines. We'll be back tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Eastern. Have a great day, folks.